no matter where they take place, are attacks on us all. Thank you. Cool. Do we have any apologies for absence?
We have apologies, Chairman, from Assemblymember Hall, Assemblymember Shah and Assemblymember Whittle.
Thank you very much. Can I welcome to the public gallery students and staff from Florida State University, St. Lawrence University in upstate New York, students and staff from St. Dominic's Sixth Form College, Harrow-on-the-Hill. Welcome. You'll see a part of London's democratic process which actually is organised properly.
Touché.
Can I provide an update on some recent Assembly activity? We concluded our consideration of the Mayor's budget. We published a letter about the efficient transportation of freight in the capital. We released a report with recommendations to combat cold, damp and mouldy homes. We concluded our campaign for more blue plaques for women on International Women's Day and handed over 250 nominations to English Heritage. There were also publications on healthy streets, social prescribing, tackling neighbourhood crime, and the results of a survey into organ donation in Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. We responded to the spring statement and announcements about Operation Linemouth, the link between school exclusions and violent crime, as well as criticisms of Crossrail. We also released a film entitled A Day in the Life of an Assembly Member. Riveting stuff. Declarations of interest. Will you please note the recommendations set out? Are there any other declarations? No. Thanks very much. Would you please agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on the 7th of February 2019 and the Mayor's question time meeting held on the 25th of February to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Will you please formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 12th of February 2019 to the 6th of March 2019? Thank you. The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Assembly members have submitted several requests for topics for inclusion within the update, details of which have been provided to the Mayor. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by reiterating on behalf of the GLA and all Londoners that our city stands with the people of Christchurch following the horrific terrorist attack last week. Our hearts go out to all the victims and their grieving families and friends. Whilst London might be more than 11,000 miles away from where this attack took place, it did feel, as you said, Chair, like an attack on all of us, on our values and on the freedoms we hold dear. We felt the ripples of hatred, the fear and the grief. Understandably, many Muslims in London and across the world are not only mourning the victims, but also worried about what this means for their own safety. I want to reassure our Muslim communities at this time. There is increased policing around mosques and other places of worship, and we'll be hosting a safety and security session at City Hall this evening. Experts, including the Met Police, will provide advice to London mosque leaders on how to build security capacity, share best practice, and improve safety and security. I welcome the commitment from the government for extra security funding. I've written to the Home Secretary seeking clarity that this will be provided immediately to enable mosques to prepare ahead of Ramadan in just 6 weeks' time, and that it will be provided to other places of worship around the country to protect citizens of all faiths at risk of being targeted by extremists. I can also inform Assembly members this morning that I've announced that we'll be installing air quality monitors at London's most polluted hospitals. Vulnerable patients are more susceptible to the harmful effects of air pollution, which has been linked to stunted lung growth, asthma, cancer and dementia. This is part of our efforts to do all we can to protect Londoners from our toxic air, which is leading to thousands of premature deaths every single year and disproportionately impacting our poorest communities. London now has the most comprehensive air quality monitoring of any city in the world. This is a complete contrast to the previous administration, who hid away important research and failed to take action. We're now counting down the days until we introduce the world's first 24-hour, 7-day-a-week ultra-low emission zone. The ULEZ will dramatically help clean up our air and reduce road transport emissions in London, including around many hospitals. I know the Conservatives oppose my measures, but hope that other Assembly members will get behind these vital initiatives. I've also, Chair, as you mentioned, been asked for 3 separate oral updates. The first question is on advertising on TfL. TfL was approached by the Michael Jackson Innocent Group to run an advertising campaign on the side of TfL buses for a period running between the 25th of February and the 24th of March 2019. As with other advertising requests, this came through TfL's advertising partner, Exterion. The adverts ran on 60 buses. Before TfL accepted these adverts, they sought advice from the Committee of Advertising Practice, the independent body which provides guidance on the acceptability of adverts. On the basis that the adverts complied with TfL's advertising policy, they were accepted. At no point were these ads referred to me or anyone in the Mayor's office. Under TfL's guidelines, it is able to review adverts once they are running, and if upon review it decides that an advert is no longer appropriate, they can be removed from the network. As set out in TfL's advertising policy, Clause H, advertisements can be reviewed and rejected if the content contains images or messages which relate to matters of, and I quote, public controversy or sensitivity. In light of the concerns raised by members of the public and victims' charities about the advertisements, TfL came to the view that it would not accept an application to extend the advertising run and decided it would be appropriate to remove the adverts ahead of schedule. The second oral update is about City Hall loans for affordable homes. Last year, Anthology, a small developer, approached the GLA for assistance in financing the purchase and delivery of Woodlands and Masters House in Lambeth. The site was being sold off by an NHS trust with no requirement for affordable housing and encompassed the Cinema Museum, a locally significant cultural asset. The GLA agreed a fully repayable interest-bearing loan of £29.9 million to Anthology to build 254 new homes at Woodlands and Masters House in Lambeth. A condition of the loan is that the level of affordable housing in the scheme is 50%. The funding comes from the Land Fund, which I set up to enable the GLA to take a more interventionist role in the land market. This includes supporting new home builders, securing high levels of affordable housing, and speeding up build-out rates. The loan to Anthology supports all 3 of these objectives. The decision-making process for the loan was in line with the mayoral decision that authorised the establishment of the Land Fund. That mayoral decision delegated authority to the Executive Director of Housing and Land to improve investments via a Director Decision form. Before the Director Decision is made, investments are considered by the GLA's Interest Rate Setting Board and the Land Fund Investment Committee, the latter of which includes independent members. This particular loan was considered by the Investment Committee on the 24th of July 2018 and authorised by the Executive Director on the 3rd of December 2018. Another loan relating to the Marshgate Lane site in London Borough of Newham was authorised by the same decision. The same process is followed for similar loans, including the one I recently announced to support Peabody to deliver more affordable homes at the Holloway prison site, which led to over 60% of over 1,000 homes on the site to be socially rented and genuinely affordable, and will include public green space and a centre for women. In the event of the scheme not progressing in line with the agreed milestones, such as failing to achieve a planning content satisfactory to the GLA, it is fully recoverable, protected through a charge against the land. The third oral update, Chair, is in relation to Interserve. Interserve is a multinational group of support services and construction companies based in the UK with a revenue of £2.7 billion in 2018 and a workforce of 68,000 people worldwide. They provide a number of services across the GLA group, including cleaning for London Fire Brigade, support to the Met Police and security guards, track cleaning and vegetation clearance for TfL. Last Friday, the holding company was put into administration after shareholders did not back a rescue package put forward by Interserve's lenders. Later that day, the lenders then bought the Interserve trading businesses from the administrator. This means that Interserve continues to provide services, including to the GLA group, and there was no interruption to the service provided to us. The GLA group has arrangements for monitoring the financial health of key suppliers, both when they bid for contracts and throughout their delivery. Where risks identified, suitable contingency plans are produced. This was done in this case. However, it was not necessary to implement them as Interserve continued to trade.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Mr Mayor, given your promise to be the most transparent and open mayor, will you agree to publish the agendas, minutes and papers for the GLA Interest Rate Setting Board, the Land Fund Investment Committee and GLA Land and Property Board?
I'm happy to look into that, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We now moved. Assembly Member Boff.
Mr Mayor, with regard to the Michael Jackson adverts that appeared on buses, did you approve the action prior to the advertisements being withdrawn?
I wasn't aware of them, Chair.
You were not aware of the adverts or TfL's actions prior to them being withdrawn?
Both.
No, thank you. Did you or TfL inform exterior media before the order was issued to withdraw the advertisements?
So did TfL or
Did you or TfL inform exterior media, the TfL's agent, before the order was issued to withdraw the advertisements?
No, I'm not sure it's quite an order. I think it's worth explaining for the purpose of understanding the procedure, how it works. I mean, TfL receives, roughly speaking, 16,000 adverts a year, 50 a day. The process doesn't involve TfL, it involves Exterior, who have a process in place, which is it goes through a team at the advertising partner. They've got their own specific copy approval terms. They assess that against TfL's advertising policy.
Oh, so this was exterior media that rejected the advertisement?
So exterior media go through the process. If they feel there are issues around the advertising, it's raised either internally or with the committees of advertising practice, and then it comes to TfL after that process. In the process of the review mechanism, as I understand it, TfL, when they were contacted by the victims' charities and members of the public, discussed it with Exterior and decided to remove them using the Clause H criteria.
So exterior media withdrew the advert, not TfL?
They're the partner that does the advertising.
The partner does the advertising,
Yeah.
so the instruction came from TfL to withdraw the advertisement?
I think there was a review of Policy H once the complaints came in.
Who did that review?
I think it was TfL and Exterior working together. I'm not sure.
Perhaps you could write to me and tell me how that decision was taken.
Well, I think it was I've got the answer here, so I beg your pardon, sorry, it's my fault.
Yeah.
I didn't read it. So TfL heard the concerns of members of the public and victims' charities who objected to the adverts, reflected on its position and made a decision accordingly.
Was the advertiser informed of the decision prior to the messages being posted by TfL on social media of that decision?
I'm not sure, but I'm happy to...
If you could write to me
Yeah.
with that. Did you or TfL inform the advertiser before the order was issued to withdraw the advertisements?
Well, I can't answer specifically, but I'm sure TfL would have, or Exterior would have had discussions with the advertiser because they made the request to extend the adverts. That request was declined, but also a decision was taken using the policy and bearing in mind the concerns raised to remove the adverts in advance of the first tranche.
Yeah, so could you write to me and confirm whether or not the advertiser was informed prior to the decision to withdraw the adverts? Could you let me know that?
In the same letter, I'll answer that question as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Did TfL meet with the advertiser to suggest alternate wording for the advertisements?
Again, I'm not sure, but what I can do, Chair, is ask TfL to write to the Assembly member answering the various questions he's raised
Mr. Mayor,
today.
You summed up the reasons as being a review of Clause H, which said images that concern a public controversy and sensitivity.
Yeah.
You did, however, allow the People's Vote advertisements on TfL.
TfL
I think
did
that's quite controversial, isn't it?
Well, I think the advertising partners and TfL have an advertising policy which they use, and as I said, they receive, roughly speaking, 50 a day, 16,000 across the year, and as I understand it, there's no breach of the policy, and in their view, it's not particularly controversial or sensitive.
You don't consider the People's Vote controversial?
I don't consider the adverts on the TfL estate in relation to the People's Vote particularly controversial or sensitive.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Right. We now go to the questions to the Mayor, which are already set out on the priority order paper. The first question is from Assembly Member Dismore and relates to Brexit.
Thank you, Chair. On February the 14th, MPs voted to reject the government's bad Brexit deal. Last week, MPs voted again to reject the very same bad Brexit deal. It's noteworthy that the Prime Minister thinks that MPs should get a second or even third say, but not the British public. Over and over again, government has failed to deliver promised breakthroughs from its hopeless Brexit negotiations. This deal would worsen life chances and reduce opportunities in London and across the UK for future generations. The Prime Minister needs to put our city and our country first and withdraw Article 50. It's time to give the public the final say on Brexit with the option of remaining in the EU. With our partners in the London Resilience Forum, I've taken the steps we can to ensure the capital is prepared in the event the UK leaves the European Union with no deal in place. However, the government's uncoordinated approach to the planning for a no deal has made this very difficult. For many businesses, it has almost been nigh on impossible for them to plan ahead. I'm helping business owners to access information and support that is available through the Brexit Business Resources Hub, and a new programme will launch shortly to help those who need face-to-face advice about navigating Brexit. For EU Londoners, especially the vulnerable and hardest to reach, I'm particularly concerned that the government is not doing enough to prepare them for the biggest change in rights and immigration status for a generation. I've developed an EU Londoners Hub to provide EU citizens and their families with the latest information about their rights post-Brexit, and to direct them to expert legal advice and support services.
Thank you for that answer, which I think is a very important one. But would you agree that the problem actually is that 3 years after the referendum, it's still the case that no one knows where we're going to end up, leaving Londoners and London businesses in no place to prepare what may or may not be coming, with or without an extension which may or may not be granted. And in any event, Mrs May's rejected deal completely ignores the 80% of our exports, those in services, which aren't mentioned in it at all. We're still at a risk of a no-deal crash-out, aren't we, despite the parliamentary vote?
I think we are probably at the greatest risk we've been since June the 23rd of leaving the EU without any deal whatsoever. And that would be catastrophic for businesses, catastrophic for the NHS, catastrophic for construction, catastrophic for how Londoners feel in their future as well. And we've never been closer to that possibility than we are now, not just because of the proximity to March 29th, but because of the way the Prime Minister has handled negotiation. The idea that a Prime Minister who's failed to get the support of Parliament should make a speech at a lectern outside number 10 Downing Street, hectoring and lecturing MPs, almost calling them enemies of the people by implication, to try and get their support, I find astonishing.
Yeah, and with potentially only a week to go, due to the stubborn incompetence of the Prime Minister, who seems to be far more concerned about the future of the Conservative Party than of the country, she's still refusing to engage constructively with other parties and, as you say, slags off MPs instead. Even though the Speaker correctly says she can't bring back her failed plan for a third time, isn't it time to explore support for other options for a softer Brexit, as proposed by Labour, or better still to go back to the country in the people's vote, a second referendum to break the impasse? And will you be joining me and others on the protest on Saturday?
Well, I think the best thing the Prime Minister can do is, bearing in mind we are sleepwalking towards exiting the EU without any deal whatsoever, is to stop the clock running. It is possible to stop the clock running by withdrawing revoking Article 50. That stops it. The Prime Minister or her successor can then have a game plan in relation to what sort of relationship they want to have with the EU, negotiate with the EU, get a deal that we're happy with and doesn't damage our economy, businesses and our country, and then reserve Article 50. Another alternative is to get an extension or withdraw, and bear in mind Parliament's in gridlock, to give the British public a say in relation to what we think the future should be. And I make this point. The Prime Minister is willing to go back to Parliament with the same deal again and again and again to give MPs another chance to change their mind, knowing what they know now, but scared to give the British public that same right and that same say. I can't think of anything more democratic than giving the British public a say on do we accept the terms of exit she's negotiated with the option of remaining in the European Union. I'm not sure what she's scared of.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. And we've seen the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg with his Conservative ERG cronies, former Mayor Boris Johnson, who should know better but for his overweening personal ambition. The DUP, and no doubt the UKIP baggies will be speaking next, argue that the World Trade Organization rules are the panacea that allow free trade. However, they're being disingenuous, aren't they? Whilst we could implement zero tariffs on imports, it doesn't mean that other countries must do the same. So our exported goods will be more expensive overseas. Businesses could go bust, and as the World Trade Organization Article 24 only covers goods and not services, the restrictions 80% of our exports face are completely unknown. What does Article 24 of the WTO rules in the event of a no-deal Brexit mean for London's economy, which is so heavily service-based?
Can I just remind Assembly members why this discussion is so important? One of the statutory responsibilities we have is to promote our economy. And Brexit is intrinsically linked with our economy. So if those Tories hectoring over there, they need to understand this issue is the most important issue the GLA has faced since we were formed in 2000. There is no part of London life not affected by this decision. That's why it's really important for you to be asking these really important questions. So those who want us to leave the EU without any deal whatsoever use the World Trade Organization as the reason, the fig leaf if you like, why things can be okay in the future. And you're right to ask about Article 24. Well, the first thing is WTO rules don't address the non-tariff barriers in relation to services that we trade in so much. You know, where we export services, we have a trade surplus in relation to services. 90% of London's economy is in the service sector, and 90% of our country's economy is in the service sector. The deal negotiated by the Prime Minister doesn't address any of that, but WTO rules won't help us in relation to the non-tariff barriers in relation to services. But the idea that the European Union will give us zero tariff deals in relation to us leaving the EU without any deal whatsoever because of WTO is ridiculous, because it means they have to give the same terms, zero tariff, to the rest of the world. Why would they do that? But similarly, if we were to agree zero tariff deal with the EU, we'd have to do the same with the rest of the world as well. So it's nonsense when those Brexiteers say, don't worry about leaving the EU without any deal whatsoever, we can rely on the WTO. Nonsense.
Thank you.
Okay. Assembly Member Desai.
Mr. Mayor.
Good morning.
Mr. Mayor, the New Zealand Prime Minister has called for a global fight. I was going to come to that. After the result of the referendum of 2016, there was a spike in hate crime, and a Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services have warned that there's a real possibility there will be a similar increase in reports in the coming months. I'll raise this before with you. Do you share my and HMIC's concerns over this possibility?
I do, and it's just worth reminding ourselves that there is a direct link between so-called mainstream politicians demonising immigrants, demonising others, and the increase and spike in hate crime. So when you see posters which say breaking point linked to immigration that mainstream politicians are promoting to win a referendum, don't be surprised if there's a spike in race crime, because some people think it's acceptable to behave in a certain way. And I'm concerned about the possibility of an increase in race crime or a spike because of what happens in relation to us leaving the European Union and some of the discourse taking place in the public arena by so-called mainstream politicians, amplified by the media and by social media companies as well. And I think it's really important that we prepare for that. We're vigilant and we do what we can to support those communities.
Thank you for that. So just coming to the New Zealand Prime Minister, because I wanted to get your comments on the HMIC's report. But she has called for a global fight to root out racist right-wing ideology. I agree. And clearly this needs to be done at all levels. So what do you see the role, taking sports as an example, the role of us London sporting institutions in tackling hate crime and challenging groups like the so-called Democratic Football Lads Alliance with a hate-fueled rhetoric? Will you join me in calling upon clubs like West Ham United Football Club to take a clear, unequivocal and unambiguous stand against the activities of such groups?
Well, can I just say, Chair, through you, that Cinema of Desire has a long history of campaigning against anti-racism going back many decades. And I know the work you did just this weekend in relation to the march through London to raise awareness of some of the challenges facing our diverse and wonderful communities across London. I think we've got to do a lot more in relation to stamping out racism. I think some of our football clubs have a role to play. You're right, the community work West Ham does is very good. The community work many of the clubs do is very good, but in their name, some of their so-called fans behave in a disgraceful manner. And I think it's really important that clubs call out their fans when they behave in a disgraceful manner. But you're right to put on record the good work in the community that West Ham does.
Absolutely, and I commend West Ham and indeed all other Premier clubs and London clubs, the work that they do to combat race hatred. But as I said, they need to go a step further and take a clear and unambiguous stand against people like the DFLA. Very quickly, Mr. Mayor, I'll finish on this note. Your predecessor, but one, supported events like the Rice Festival to bring London and Londoners together. Will you consider supporting mass initiatives such as Rice and the newly formed London United, which is a coalition of the London trade unions, to bring Londoners together to fight hatred in all its forms?
I mean, one of the reasons why I had London's first ever Deputy Mayor for Social Integration and Communities is to do this sort of work. It's really important. Diversity is our strength, but diversity is not the same as integration, bringing people together. And one of the roles of Dr. Debbie Weeks-Bernard is to bring people together using culture, music, arts, and other things as a way of bringing together. You will have seen in the London Borough of Waltham Forest the great work the council's doing there with the London's first ever Borough of Culture. Next year it's going to be Brent, but I'm more than happy, somebody decide for you to speak to the Deputy Mayor about other things we can be doing to bring people together.
And you set a great example in the way that you championed pride in London. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Duval.
Morning, Mr. Mayor.
Morning.
EU migration has dropped to its lowest levels now since almost for a decade. You know, I think we've asked this question again, but can you just remind us, can you just check on any latest information of what this impact is having on the various sectors within our economy in London, public and private?
Well, I think your question gives me a good opportunity to say what you believe and I believe, which is to remind ourselves of the huge benefits economically, socially and culturally brought to our city by waves of immigration over successive generations. It's really important to remind ourselves of that. And the bad news is, I'm afraid, we're already starting to see adverse consequences by net migration from the EU going down. I'll give you some examples of the numbers. So in construction, 34% of our construction workers are EU citizens not from this country, 34%. Speaking to those on construction sites, they've seen fewer people coming from the EU than in previous years. In the summer, normally, people return to country of origin and come back. Some haven't been come back, and they're very worried about our ability to build the homes we need because of the impact on construction. And many of those construction workers who are British citizens are at retiring age, a big number, so it's a big problem for us. You look at some of our other industries like hospitality. 28% of hospitality, I'm talking about hotels and restaurants, rely upon EU workers. They're also worried about our ability for them to be profitable, bearing in mind fewer people are coming. And that's before the government brings in the £30,000 a year rules in relation to immigration. What the government's proposing is unless you earn more than £30,000 a year, it'll be very hard for you to be able to come here and work. And that will decimate many of the industries across London. Think of construction, think of retail, think of hospitality, think of public administration. The NHS has a record number of vacancies. Why? Because they find it very difficult to fill them, and one of the reasons is because there are fewer citizens coming from the European Union. I don't think people have woken up to the consequences already on our city of the referendum vote and the impact of fewer people from the EU coming to our city.
In fact, these are strange times, Mr. Mayor, and the points you've just pointed out tells us some of the challenges we face. But in these strange times, even the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, used to be a cheerleader for the Conservative Party opposite is starting to damn this government and its approach towards Brexit, and to particularly about EU migration. One of the issues that surprises me, in the chaos and confusion that we now face, where the government can't even get members of its own party to vote for it in terms of the direction of travel it wants to go, is that, you know, if we were told that we were going to fill some of these jobs through EU migration, through homegrown, if I can use that term, in the last 2 years, there's been nothing signalling from government about changes in directions of how we train and reskill people to move into some of the vacancies that are going to be created. Do you not just think that adds to the confusion and debacle that we're in, and in the coming days as we leave?
Well, we've always thought, we've talked about this, the importance of training our homegrown young people to have the talents for the jobs that have been created. There should be a greater sense of urgency, but you will be aware from businesses that we've spoken to, they're concerned around the apprenticeship levy. They're concerned about the lack of investment in schools. They're concerned about the cuts being made in further education. Their concerns about the impact of the cuts in education maintenance allowance, and I could go on. And so this is a perfect storm of bad news for businesses in our city. At the same time as there are fewer people from the EU coming here who we need, the government is failing to skill up our youngsters for the jobs that will need to be filled by somebody. And it's a big challenge, and that's why it's really important that we continue to lobby the government to do the right thing in terms of, one, how we exit the EU, but in two, how we train up Londoners to have the skills we need to do these jobs.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Curtin.
Mr. Chair, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, Mr. Mayor, I was in the People's Question Time last week and sitting very near to you, and I remember hearing you say at one point, Brexit may provide opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses. And I nearly fell off my chair because you were very positive.
I think Onka did.
But that was a wonderful piece of positivity from you about Brexit, Mr. Mayor. And I thought, well, perhaps from spending nearly 3 years in the same room as me on occasions, I might have given you some of my optimism about Brexit. But unfortunately today, I've heard too much pessimism, I think. And I think the language that some people use about Brexit is far too pessimistic. I mean, you talk about sleepwalking towards a cliff, crashing out and so on. But actually, the people voted to leave the European Union because the people were right in being optimistic, and the people see this not as those things, but as breaking our shackles and walking into freedom. Don't you agree with the language of the majority of people in this country, the 17.4 million people who voted to leave, that leaving the European Union will be a good thing with lots of opportunities?
No.
Well, there's a succinct answer, Mr. Mayor. But we are leaving, and the majority of people in this country are very, very happy about that and are looking forward to it. And it is going to be the most glorious day in your 4 years of office next week on the 29th of March. And the right thing to do for London and for you as a mayor is actually to take down the flag of the European Union, which you put up 3 years ago, to mark our exit from the European Union. Are you going to remove the flag?
Well, let's wait and see if we do leave the European Union, that we can have that conversation.
Well, the good news is that we are, in law, we are going to leave next Friday, the 29th of March, if our MPs don't change the law and mess it up and betray democracy. So one thing you did say earlier is that we are we do have a very high probability that we are going to leave. I know you may not want to take down the flag yourself, the starry ring of the European Union, but if you don't, maybe someone else can take it down, because certainly the curtains are coming down on the European Union. Would you like me to take it down for you if you don't want to do it yourself?
Well, Chair, I'd be really concerned that the Assemblyman may hurt himself whilst doing so, and God forbid that should happen.
Thank you for your concern for my safety and my health and safety, Mr. Mayor. You're always a gentleman, as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Okay, I take over now. And the next question is from Assembly Member Arbour.
Thank you very much for the question. Transport for London and I both recognise the important role that passenger vessels operating on the river play in contributing to London's economy. Safety must always be the top priority. With the projected growth on the Thames combined with my Vision Zero approach to injuries and deaths on the transport network, it is essential that all vessels using the river have effective safety measures in place in the event of an accident. River policy in London is split over several different bodies, including Transport for London, the Port of London Authority, the Environment Agency and the Greater London Authority. In this case, the Port of London Authority and the Maritime and Coastguard Agency, MCA, which is under the DFT's auspices, set the regulatory and licence requirements for vessels operating on the tidal Thames. Since summer 2018, TfL has been working closely with the MCA, PLA and Marine Policing Unit through the Thames Partner Safety Group. This group has come together to work collaboratively and share best practice to ensure the expected growth on the Thames happens in a safe and sustainable way. It has identified several issues which require further consideration, one of which is the operation of heritage vessels in busy stretches of the River Thames. I'm aware that the MCA has recently carried out a consultation on its proposals for older UK passenger boats, and that some of the heritage river boat services that operate on the River Thames could be affected. TfL was not formally consulted by the MCA on the proposals for historic passenger vessels, and as such, they did not contribute to the consultation. TfL, as part of the Emerging Passenger Pier strategy, intends to review the use of TfL-owned passenger piers to ensure the safe operation of these assets in line with any proposed change brought by the PLA and MCA. The Deputy Mayor for Transport has written to Collier's Launches, who are in Assembly Member Arbour's constituency, who operate historic boats on the Thames, and confirmed that TfL would welcome discussions with them as part of any review process. I'm committed to working with all parties to continue the growth in passenger numbers the River Thames has seen over recent years. TfL will work with its partners and the Thames and London Waterways Forum to ensure that growth is safe and sustainable.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Mayor. I didn't fully understand actually what your line is going to be as chairman of TfL. Are you likely to support these proposals, which could well mean the end of the heritage vessels on the Thames?
One of the things that, Chair, we will be doing is making sure that we make clear to the DFT that if, as a consequence of their changes, there are new financial burdens on these heritage boats, they should be providing financial assistance. And one of the reasons why Deputy Mayor Alexander has made the offer to some of the vessel companies affected is to speak to TfL as part of there'll be a second review process, so TfL can feed into that. What we don't want is any heritage vessels going out of business because they can't afford the additional burdens placed upon them by the requirements that you're aware of.
Wouldn't it be a sensible thing to do for you to contact the Secretary of State on this matter and suggest to him that he takes the same line as his department takes through the DVLA, of saying that historic vehicles are currently exempt from the MOT? Wouldn't it be an appropriate approach for you to suggest that historic vessels, which have never had an accident on the river through any of the proposed changes which this regulation is supporting, would that not be the way to ensure that the heritage vessels survive on the river?
Well, I'm very happy for TfL to look at the evidence. I'm well aware of the history of river disasters in the River Thames, and if it's the case that there aren't any safety concerns around heritage vessels, then one of the things you'll be aware about is the grandfathering rights there are with historic vessels. If it's the case that there aren't safety concerns and the DFT, MCA have got it wrong, then of course they should relook at the evidence. The evidence that I have is that the MCA carried out this consultation. There are some consequences. I'm not sure if they're intended or unintended. But we want to make sure we don't have vessel companies going out of business because they can't afford to make the adaptations required.
Well, Mr. Mayor, this will be a way of saving the Secretary of State from himself if you draw his attention to the fact, and I have here a kind of roll call of the ships. I think it's fair enough to call them ships which would perhaps no longer sail past this place. We'd lose the Southern Belle, we'd lose the Yarmouth Belle, we'd lose the Clifton Castle, the Connaught, the Viscountess, and they will be no more. Are you aware, and will you draw to the Secretary of State's attention that maybe through ignorance he could perhaps be doing to these boats really what Dr. Beeching did to the branch lines and cut them off unnecessarily? My understanding is that one single company, and I'm exercised by this because most of the companies are based in my constituency. It's not just colliers. These are tens of thousands of people who use TfL piers. That will mean lots of income will be lost to TfL. More than that, it may mean that there is insufficient business on the TfL piers. And even worse than that, we only have 2 proper boatyards on the river, most of which spend their time on repairing these historic boats. If they are unable to afford to carry out the works which are required by these proposals, we will lose those boatyards. If we lose those boatyards, that's absolutely contrary to your London plan. And therefore, I'm suggesting that it really is an absolute no-brainer that we cannot lose this thing. And I am suggesting to you, and certainly I should do this, but I fully acknowledge I don't carry the weight that you do, even though he's my own minister, and say to him, there is an escape clause here. Do for the historic boats what you do for historic vehicles.
Well, the 3 points I'd make is it's clearly come to things where the chair thinks I've got more influence over Chris Grayling than he has. But secondly, it wouldn't be right for me to comment on the ignorance or otherwise of the Secretary of State, as was alluded to by the chair in his question. But thirdly, the chair is very persuasive in relation to the points he's made. Can I take away and consider the points he's made, including the other point as you were speaking occurred to me was some sort of financial assistance to those boats that do need to make a transition in relation. I've read some of the things said by some of the vessel owners about the cost of adapting is almost £250,000 for some of these ships, which is clearly not affordable to many of these companies. So why don't I reflect on the points that's been made, craft a letter, add any other points I think are sensible, and work with Senator Arbour to make sure we make representations to the Secretary of State on behalf of these companies, who are very often small businesses, family businesses, are providing a great service as well.
Yes. Well, I'm very grateful to you for that. I would like to draw to your attention, of course, it's not the companies who ought to be most concerned about this, it's ordinary Londoners. If those boats disappear from the river, much of the interest there is in the river will also disappear, and we will simply have bland, I don't want to be rude to the clippers, but we will simply have bland clippers rather than these characterful steamers. So it's a matter not of importance just to a tiny part of London, but really it's a matter for all of London. Thank you, Mr.
Understood.
Thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you. The level of affordable housing in planning permissions across London's boroughs fell to a pitiful 13% under the previous mayor. That's why our pioneering fast-track route for planning applications, which both increases the level of affordable housing and gets homes built more quickly, was so urgently needed. The fast-track route is a key feature of my new draft London plan, which is currently at its examination in public. Until my plan is adopted, we have to work under the previous mayor's London plan. But we were determined to go as far as possible, as quickly as possible, and so rather than wait until my new plan was adopted, we began developing an affordable housing and viability supplementary planning guidance as soon as I was elected. Since this guidance was formally adopted in August 2017, more than 50 applications referred to me have followed the fast-track route, and the data shows it's clearly having a positive impact. In my first year as mayor, we secured 22% affordable housing in schemes that were referred to me. This, by the way, secured even withstanding the previous mayor's planning rules. New data shows that last year we managed to increase this even further to 34%. That's with my tougher guidelines what counts as genuinely affordable rather than the previous mayor's dodgy definition. The fast-track route is helping make this happen. In 2018, more than half of the referable schemes included 35% or more affordable housing. Our approach has been welcomed by councils, developers and Londoners. Crucially, It avoids protracted viability debates and provides certainty to developers when buying land about how much affordable housing they should deliver. An important next step is the adoption of my London plan, which, as I mentioned, is currently being considered at examination in public. When it's adopted, the plan will give further strength to my definition of genuinely affordable, my fast-track approach, and my commitment to reviewing the 35% threshold in 2021. This means you'll be able to take my approach to affordable housing further. That's the right thing to do, as the data shows it's clearly working.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Can I ask for some clarification on some of the numbers you just gave me? Because you said that 34% of referable applications, no, 34% was the amount of affordable housing coming out of referable applications last year. That's the same number as you gave to Assemblymember Copley in an answer in February 2018. So by last year, do you mean during the calendar year 2018? I
think it's the same. It's the same 34% from last year. I think
so that was 2017, in fact.
No, I think so. 2017 was 16-17. So 16-17 was 22. 17-18 was 34.
17-18 was 34. Okay, thank you very much. I'm quite happy to see such progress. I mean, up from 13 to that is good. But at the moment, the threshold set to stay at 35%, which is well below the London Plan target that we're setting in the new London Plan. It's well below London's need. So I know you're currently planning to review the threshold in 2021. I hope you won't mind if whoever is the next mayor reviews it as soon as they get elected in 2020.
I don't know if that's a hustling speech or a question.
I'm not sure.
I'm hoping to be the next mayor, so we'll review it in 2021.
You're not, so if you're the next mayor, you won't review it until 2021, but if anyone else does, they can step in like you did with the SPG and change it then.
I'm not really sure how to respond.
Are
we going to have 13 months of this?
I don't like to deal in fantasy, Mr. Mayor.
So just to clarify, Mr. Mayor, you're not considering reviewing it any sooner than 2021, even if it's successful?
It's just worth reminding ourselves that we are currently still operating on the previous Mayor's London Plan, and I've got to act within the law. We did something quite bold and actually publish an SPG with the constraints of the previous plan and trying to persuade developers to go faster. Some people said we couldn't do it. And you know what I mean by that? And she decided to be the next mayor. And we are doing it and see the progress made. Now, if you're saying we're the victim of success because my policies are working and I should be more ambitious, I'll take the compliment.
Yeah.
But also look at the evidence. And we'll also have a new London Plan coming into play next year. It could well be the new London Plan, which is far more ambitious in relation to affordable housing, leads to a further change of behaviour from developers. But we need to make it attractive to make the fast-track route work for developers. And that's why I'm going to review it in 2021 when we'll have a year's operation of the new London Plan, but also seeing the progress made with the fast-track threshold.
Okay, thank you. I'll be following the numbers very closely myself too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next question is from Assemblymember McCartney and relates to violence reduction.
Firstly, I'd like to express my condolences to those who've lost loved ones. Every death as a result of violent crime is an utter tragedy, leaving lives destroyed and families heartbroken. As you know, Chair, I often meet those bereaved families who've lost loved ones as a result of violent crime. Sadly, the simple answer to your question is no, the government's response has not been good enough. Without excusing criminality, the causes of violent crime are extremely complex and involve deep-seated problems like poverty, inequality, social alienation, and a lack of opportunities for young people. This has been made far worse by the government's huge cuts since 2010 to our police and preventative services, like youth services, local councils, mental health services, schools and charities. As a direct consequence of government cuts, the number of police officers on our street has fallen, and we've seen the decimation of the very services that help to address the root causes of crime. It was absurd for the Prime Minister to claim recently that cuts to police officer numbers is not linked to the rise in violent crime, something that the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, other senior police officers and rank and file officers across the country have said is just not true. Cuts have consequences, and we're now seeing the devastating reality of this across the country. I welcome the very limited extra funding to tackle knife crime that the Chancellor announced in the spring statement last week, but frankly, this is just a drop in the ocean compared to what's actually required. And let's put this into context. The government's promised an extra £100 million for the police forces across the entire country, but here in London, the Prime Minister has already forced the Met to cut £850 million since 2010, with £263 million worth of cuts still to come by 2022. This is on top of all the cuts the government's made to preventative services like mental health, youth services and schools. As Mayor, I'm doing all I can, leading from the front to tackle this problem in our city, with a relentless focus on both arresting violent offenders and tackling the root causes of crime. We've funded a new dedicated violent crime task force with nearly 300 police officers focusing on the areas worst affected. This task force has already seized 1,479 dangerous weapons and arrested 3,632 suspects. We've also established a new violence reduction unit, bringing the police together with local councils, the health service, community groups and others to work on a shared public health approach to preventing people from turning to violent crime in the first place. And we've created a £45 million Young Londoners Fund to provide young people with positive alternatives to crime and to help Londoners to get out of gangs and violence into employment and training. But it's becoming clearer than ever in recent weeks that this is a national problem that cities like London cannot solve alone.
Thank you, and it's that latter point I want to delve into a little bit further. Last week, the Home Secretary talked about the need for a public health approach to tackle this issue, which is something you're instituting in London. But on that same day, we had the Health Secretary dismissing such an approach. As you're quite rightly saying, the Prime Minister said there's no link between police officer numbers and certain crimes, which was roundly denounced by police chiefs. And the National Police Chiefs Council, Sarah Thornton, has said that the rise in knife crime is a national emergency. Do you get the sense that government is coordinated enough and understands the drivers of this to actually elicit a national response?
I do not think this government's coordinated when it comes to fighting violent crime. I don't think they understand the importance of a national response. Let me give you a compare and contrast. In 2002, we saw a massive increase in street crime. The Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair, called a Cobra meeting, got the various Secretaries of State around the room together, plus the Chief Constables, and demanded action, but said, we will meet every week to make sure we get a grip on this. Tony Blair's Prime Minister would attend those meetings every week, would ask Secretary of State from one department to make sure he or she works with another department, as they couldn't be working inconsistently or using different policies or passing the buck. Within 6 months, there was a 10% reduction in street crime. When have you seen this Prime Minister lead that sort of action? When have you seen Cobra being convened? What you're seeing is the Home Secretary having to lobby his colleagues, his peers, to take action. And as you've seen, the differences have been exposed. Home Secretary saying public health approach, Health Secretary saying no public health approach. Well, that's why the Prime Minister's got to get a grip and lead this and fight this every day. There are new victims, and I think they are preventable victims if there was action taken from the top.
Now, you've called for Cobra to be instituted. Have government listened to those calls? Have they given you a response?
Well, I think as we saw last night with the Prime Minister's press conference, she has a tin air. She's got a tin air when it comes to Brexit, and she's got a tin air when it comes to fighting violent crime. I think the Chancellor, by the way, has also got a tin air when it comes to fighting violent crime. The idea £100 million spread across the country is going to make any impact is ridiculous.
Thank you. Now, in the last few days, we've had your predecessor, the previous Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, saying that he wants money to be taken away for victims of child abuse. He doesn't see the need to look at historic child abuse investigations. But at the same time, you've got the policing minister distancing himself from that view. And I'm going to quote the policing minister. He states that, I don't want it to be a choice between saying his priority and his priority was to get more resources into policing. And he made this comment that policing, that is too stretched, particularly in London. Has it gone to a case where we have to choose between investigating crimes against children or tackling these issues? Should it be the case that the Commissioner has to make those decisions?
Well, the police will not stop investigating child abuse cases. They very much will. It's very important they do. But what you're seeing now is national politicians finally waking up to the consequences of their cuts. I'll tell you this, the comments from Boris Johnson in relation to historic child abuse cases are disgraceful. There are some people in this room who consider him to be their putative leader. They should be condemning his comments rather than staying silent and thereby condoning them. They are disgraceful.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we welcome, please, the school council from the Faraday School in Tyre Hamlets? Where are you?
You're there?
Okay. The next question is from Assembly Member Prince and relates to temporary accommodation on the Hainault Estate play areas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware of plans by Redbridge Council to provide temporary accommodation for homeless households on 2 sites in their borough, which Assembly Member Prince asked a written question about last month. I expect all boroughs to take account of the policies in the draft London plan, but I would have no say over these schemes as they would not be referred to me. I understand from the Council that the site at Woodman Road has been occupied by a disused health centre that has now been demolished. The other site at Brockett Way contains a multi-use games area and was designated for housing when Assemblymember Prince was a councillor and cabinet member at Redbridge Council. This is not a new designation by the council. I understand, though, that the local Labour councillors have worked effectively with the council leadership to agree an alternative location for the temporary accommodation. This means that Brockett Way will now be withdrawn from the council's plans without damaging the council's important efforts to help homeless households. Even Assemblymember Prince would, I'm sure, accept the huge and urgent pressure that Redbridge and other councils face finding homes for homeless households. The government's damaging approach to welfare and housing means that more and more Londoners are spending long periods of time in limbo in temporary accommodation, often away from their local area. Most such households are parents with children, which makes the situation even more distressing. We're giving councils all the support we can. For example, City Hall is funding the Pan-London Place scheme, which enables meanwhile sites to be used as accommodation for homeless families. We also fund the work behind Capital Letters, a scheme through which councils can collaborate to secure private rented housing for homeless households. But fundamentally, government ministers must reverse their policies that force so many Londoners into homelessness. First, the government must properly fund councils' work to prevent homelessness and must reverse their damaging welfare cuts. Second, they must radically overhaul the private rented sector to make it more secure and affordable. And finally, the government must invest far more in council and social rented housing, as that is the only long-term solution to the crisis of homelessness and housing more widely that we face in London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's very helpful indeed. But just to confirm, you will do all you can to defend children's play areas in London?
Those are in my power, of course.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, is that it? Right. Next question is from Assembly Member Eshalomi and relates to Girl and Gang Association.
Thank you for this question, and I'd like to thank you for all the work you're doing to highlight this important issue. I know Assembly Member Eshalomi hosted the launch the Girls, Gangs and the Abusive Relationships report by Samantha Jory Dada, which shows some of the often hidden abuses that gangs can inflict on young women. To help ensure that issues such as this are identified and tackled, a core commitment of the new Violence Reduction Unit is to embed community involvement throughout and to hear from voices that are often overlooked. I've always been clear that the new London VRU will tackle all forms of violence through a public health approach, and this includes violence against women and girls, including the exploitation of young women by gangs. I'm delighted Liv Peck, the former London Council's Executive Member for Crime and Public Protection, who led London Borough's cross-party work to keep Londoners safe, has now joined to lead the unit, as she has a strong track record in this area. You'll be aware that one of the primary risks for young women from gangs is sexual exploitation. A report from the Children's Commissioner found that 65% of young women they interviewed were being pressurised or coerced into sexual activity. There are a wide range of existing programmes I fund to support young women in such circumstances. In February, we announced an additional £15 million of funding to respond to the increasing demands and services for women and girls who've been the victim of violence. This is on top of the record £44 million investment through my strategy to end violence against women and girls. City Hall also funds 4 rape crisis centres across London, supporting women who've experienced sexual violence. Alongside this, I've provided funding to the Empower programme, providing specialist one-to-one support services for young women who've experienced sexual exploitation. City Hall also funds the SWAP scheme, which helps young women fleeing violence to get housing. We're also supporting services that are working to directly tackle gangs, such as the London Gang Exit Programme, Response and Rescue, which is working to combat in county lines, as well as a range of projects through my new Young Londoners Fund.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for citing that report, which I hope you will have a chance to read. I appreciate you're busy. One of the things that we highlighted in the report was the fact that when we look at violence, the focus on girls is sometimes hidden, but we know that women and girls play an important role in the terms of they're often the ones who are probably picking up the pieces. They're often the ones who are supporting some of these young boys and men. They're often the ones that are the first people at an incident when an incident's been committed. But when we look at the services, they're not commissioned towards women and girls. How do we tackle this culture where we see the fact that women and girls who are associated with gangs or violent youth crime are not being addressed properly in terms of the services out there for them?
You know, firstly, I've already had a chance to look at the executive summary, and I'll read the report thoroughly. It's a really important piece of work. One of the things that I was shocked to discover is last year, because of lack of services across London, many of these service providers had to close their books. Some had a 6-month waiting list for some of the most vulnerable Londoners to receive advice and support they need, which is why I announced the additional funding of £50 million so they could open their books and see vulnerable young Londoners who need assistance. And they are girls and women. And when you hear the stories, and you've heard the stories, I challenge you not to be heartbroken about some of these stories. The Children's Commissioner has also recognised the large number of girls and young women being exploited sexually. And you're right, we've got to recognise that there's a big issue in relation to violence against women and girls. That's why the VRU will be looking also at this really important issue. It's be embedded in their work.
One of the other things that came up was around the role of the police, and we know that there are issues with some parts of the community entrusting the police and coming forward with that information. And again, a number of our young women and girls do hold vital information in terms of helping the police to solve this really complex issue. It's fantastic this month we're celebrating, and all throughout this year we'll be celebrating 100 years of women joining the Met Police. How can we work with the Met Police and frontline community workers to make sure we're giving women that confidence to come forward to report crimes and actually speaking with the police in terms of addressing this really big issue?
Well, a number of answers to your question. Firstly, we've got to make sure we raise awareness of these crimes and let people know they are crimes and people should be reporting them. That means giving people confidence that the police will respond to a report being made. We've actually got to make our police service look more like the community that she seeks to police. We need more women in our police service, more black, Asian, minority ethnic people in our police service. So our police service looks like the community that we are policing. At the moment, we've got a record number of female police officers, but it's still, roughly speaking, only 26-27%. We need to do far, far better. In relation to the new recruitment we're doing as a result of our funding from City Hall, we're hoping to get more women joining our police service. That'll make it easier in relation to girls and women reporting some of these crimes. And we need to make sure we change the culture in the police service, and we are. I mean, the Commissioner is determined to make sure we learn the lessons from previous HMIC reports to make the police service more responsive. And the final thing is the role of the Victims Commissioner. Claire Waxman has done a really good job in making sure the whole of the criminal justice system is more receptive to victims and takes their concerns more seriously.
And just lastly, Mr. Mayor, I know that you, rightly so, there is a review of the gangs matrix. There are some women involved in that. Only 0.5% of people on gangs matrix are female. But could I ask that when we're looking at reviewing that and the people on the matrix, that there's a gender-based solution in terms of how we deal with some of the women on the matrix?
Well, Chair, can make sure those points are taken on board by the Deputy Mayor, and that's taken on board by in relation to the review as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Boff to ask a question on performance.
Thank you, Chair. I'm immensely proud of what we've been able to achieve at City Hall since I became Mayor. Our actions are already making a tangible difference to Londoners' lives. This includes starting to build record numbers of new social rent and council homes, giving residents and tenants the right to vote on estate regeneration projects, helping record numbers of homeless people by doubling City Hall's outreach teams, making commuting more affordable by freezing all TfL fares and introducing an unlimited hopper bus fare, getting the night tube and night overground up and running, reducing the number of strike days on the tube by around 65%, tackling air pollution by cleaning up our bus and taxi fleets, creating low-emission bus zones, setting up the most comprehensive air quality monitoring of any city in the world, and from next month, introducing the world's first ultra-low emission zone. We're also tackling both crime and the causes of crime in the face of huge government cuts by investing in the Met Serious Violent Crime Task Force, creating the Violence Reduction Unit and establishing the £45 million Young Londoners Fund. However, the past few years haven't been easy for London. We have had a series of terrorist attacks, the Sandilands tram crash and the awful Grenfell Tower fire, and seen the increase in violent crime like the rest of England and Wales. We've also seen continuing austerity from the government that has damaged our public services, and the chaos of Brexit has caused real damage to our economy and our communities. As Mayor, it can be extremely frustrating when I'm unable to tackle some of the challenges we face due to inadequate funding or lack of powers. For example, I'm doing everything possible to tackle the rise of violent crime, but our hands are partially tied because of government's continued cuts to the police and preventative services since 2010, and because we don't control many of the services that contribute to preventing crime from happening in the first place. Similarly, we can't go as fast as I want towards tackling the crisis in housing because the government refuses to devolve the necessary powers and its funding for affordable housing in London, and it's still less than half it was in 2010. We're also being held back from cleaning up London's air because of the government's refusal to fund a diesel scrappage scheme or give Londoners control over emission from the River Thames or construction. All these problems have been made much worse by a government that's been preoccupied on Brexit to the exclusion of other issues ever since I became Mayor. We've also started, Chair, to fix many of the failings of the last Mayor, which certain Assembly members in this chamber encouraged and supported, such as stopping new social homes from being built, allowing TfL fares to rise by 42%, wasting money on water cannons that were never used, a garden bridge that never started, an estuary airport that didn't go anywhere, and a new route master bus costing twice as much as regular double-decker buses, and more than £700 million converting the Olympic Stadium to a loss-making football stadium.
Mr Mayor, thank you so much for that.
I could go on with my successes.
I'm sure you could. You often do go on, Mr Mayor.
Well,
but
Chair,
what I've asked for is your biggest failing, and do you have one?
No.
The first issue that you mentioned, Mr Mayor, was that you claimed a record numbers of social homes were being built. And you claimed that 12,526 GLA-funded homes were started last year in and that was just met the lower end of the target that you had agreed with government, following on from their record amount of money that they'd given you to build those homes. Yet in January, you responded to me that 1,256 of these homes, 10%, were actually restarts and not new starts at all. Do you think, Mr Mayor, it would have been more honest for you to have reported the real figure of 11,270 to the government and to Londoners?
Ours is the accurate figure. I'm just sorry the previous Mayor had dodgy figures. We've made sure the figures are correct. The figures we have are record numbers of starts on affordable homes since these powers were devolved, more than 12,500. A promise made, promise delivered, record broken.
So are you saying that your answer to me in January was factually wrong when you said to me that a total of 1,256 affordable homes started in the financial year 2017-2018 were restarts from previous years? Which is right, what you've just said or what you replied to me in that, for that question?
I've just said that the number of homes started under the previous Mayor were incorrect.
I haven't asked about that, Mr Mayor. I've asked about restarts. And have you included restarts in that figure of 12,526 GLA-funded homes? Have you included over 1,200 restarts?
The 12,500 plus starts in that year are starts according to the government's criteria set by them. That does include taking the dodgy figures from the previous Mayor's year out from the previous Mayor, which were wrong and weren't satisfying the criteria, and making sure we got those right.
Mr Mayor, does your housing policy, bearing in mind that it's failed to meet targets, does it really spark joy for you?
Well, I don't accept the premise that it's failed to meet its target. The target was to break a record of 12,500. That's been done. The target is to start 116,000 homes by 2022. We're in course to doing that. The target this year is to break that record again by starting 14,000 homes. And I'm hopeful and confident by the end of April, when we have the figures out, we'll have met that target as well. So I'm bear in mind...
Mr Mayor, you're halfway through the year. You're halfway through the year and halfway through the period of funding for the 116,000 homes that Londoners need. We're halfway through that funding period, and yet you've built less than a quarter of those homes that are required.
The number of starts...
Is that a policy you're proud of, Mr Mayor?
I'm really proud of Londoners being able to finally afford to live in London rather than luxury penthouse flats being bought by foreigners to use as gold bricks for investment. I'm proud that we've ditched a dodgy definition of a home costing £450,000 being affordable when it's clearly not. I'm proud we've dodged a dodgy definition of homes that are 80% market value being considered being affordable as being dumped in the bin. I'm proud that my definition of affordable of a home that's either a council rent, a social rent, a London living rent, a home that's been shared ownership is one that's leading to more homes being built with a harder criteria. And the starts this year, by the way, in relation to percentage terms, we've made more progress this year in relation to starts than last year at this stage. And last year we met the target and broke it, and I'm confident and hopeful this year we can do the same.
Do you think, Mr Mayor, when you next declare figures, you can do so without fiddling those figures to make it look more?
Oh, that can't be right.
Well, Chair, I think this is a very serious allegation made by an Assembly member against officers that work so hard in this building. I would ask, Chair, for that remark to be removed, because he's basically criticising officers who can't defend themselves, and he should be ashamed of that.
Not at all, Mr Mayor. They are your figures. They are your figures, Mr Mayor.
I mean, Chair, it's a very serious... I mean, the officers can't be here to defend themselves. I think it's outrageous. It's outrageous. It's outrageous.
Mr Mayor, these figures are published in your name.
Yes. They are your figures, Mr Mayor.
So, he must be referring to you.
Chair, I know it's become a habit of yours to defend Tories.
No,
but let me just explain the role of the Chair.
That's completely unacceptable, Mr Mayor.
I'm glad you find that unacceptable.
Well done, Mr.
It's funny what you find unacceptable, isn't it?
Chair, if you're going to
Assembly Member Duval.
If you're going to make rulings about whose figures they are, also can you remind the Assembly it's the government definitions, and that's the same argument that was put back in the past of why those figures were in order and they were corrected later on. The government determines how those figures are compiled, not the Mayor. They may be in the Mayor's name, but you also ought to make that ruling clear to this Assembly.
Okay, you've made your point.
In that case, has the government expressed concerns with you about the pace of development of your housing programme?
No, the government's been really pleased that we've managed to, for example, in the last year, we had more starts for social rents than the rest of England put together. We had more starts last year in relation to social rents than the previous 4 years put together. And I think the government can learn a lot from London.
Mr Mayor, I look forward to seeing the next release of figures, and we will be going over it with the fine-tooth comb.
But Chair, can I just say, Chair, the only people that are hoping that we don't build enough affordable homes are the Tories. That is a disgrace. They would rather, for electoral reasons, see house building fell. That is disgraceful. They're willing us to fail. How shocking that is.
I would like you to cite where that has been the case, because actually, if it were a Conservative mayor, we would be building at least double.
Chair, I'll tell you where it's been the case. I'll tell you where it's been the case.
At least double of what you're producing, because you're spending more time on press releases and not enough time on delivering homes.
Well, here we go, Chair. Let me tell you. So when it was the case that we set the target for 12,500 starts of genuinely affordable homes, not dodgy definition, they said we couldn't do it and were willing us to fail. We did it. Rather than celebrating, they're looking for holes to try and make out as if we didn't do it. This year, we've got an even more stretching target of 14,000. They say we can't do it, and they're willing us to fail. You know what? We are going to do it, and we're going to celebrate, and they're going to wish we'd failed. That's how shocking these Tories are. They'd rather see us failing rather than building homes Londoners so desperately need. They should be ashamed.
Yes, and indeed, Mr Mayor, figures will be massaged to try and
Oh,
justify
again, Chair.
your
Okay,
next
so let me be clear.
questions. Thank you very much, Chair.
Let me be clear, Chair.
No.
Well, no, that's a question.
No,
Try and be impartial for 5 seconds, Chair.
That will,
Mr. Mayor,
that
a
will
point
do,
of order.
Mr. Mayor.
Can I just intercede? I'm usually very irritated by the Mayor's personal abuse against yourself as Chair. In the previous years, when Jeanette Arnold chaired very ably, we never heard that sort of abuse towards the Chair. I'm shocked by this, and I'd like to go on record. I wish Mr. Mayor...
Well, Chair, can I just put on record...
Will attack ourselves and others, perhaps, if he chooses to, but not the Chair of this Assembly.
No. Chair, I just wish Conservative colleagues defended the Speaker in the House like they defend you in this Assembly.
Yes. How glad I am that I'm not Mr. Burko. Can we now please...
Well, Chair, can I just say Labour MPs are glad you're not Mr. Burko as well?
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, I heard the word failure, and for some reason the first person I thought of was Boris Johnson, your predecessor, and of course
leader.
Their mayor. And you have highlighted very helpfully in your answer to Assembly Member Boff some of Boris Johnson's massive achievements. £320,000 of taxpayer cash wasted on water cannon he couldn't legally use. £40 million on overpriced buses that overheated and were basically mobile saunas. And of course £43 million on the botched Garden Bridge. Do you think that perhaps their mistake is thinking that the mayor should be judged favourably based on how much public money they waste?
Well, absolutely right. And the thing is, you can imagine what would have happened if a Labour mayor had wasted that amount of taxpayers' money. But I appreciate he's their putative leader. I appreciate they're part of his leadership campaign. But you've not mentioned the Estuary Airport. You don't mention the double-decker buses. You don't mention some of his other projects that led to huge problems across our city. The cable car being another example. And so, we're living with the legacy of having to clean up the mess left by the previous mayor, but at the same time making fantastic progress across our city. And you'd have thought you'd be willing us to succeed. You'd have thought you'd be wanting us to do even better. But instead of that, you've got carping from the side and defending the previous mayor. And now he leaves the room. Probably to text him to say these are some of the issues that need to be addressed during the leadership contest that's coming up in the Tory party.
And of course you don't benefit from government ministers like George Osborne and David Cameron bending the rules to ensure that cash is committed to these vanity projects. You're a Labour mayor fighting a Conservative government that is cutting your budget.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we in London since 2016 have not simply had to deal with a government who's been making massive cuts to our city, not simply dealing with a government whose Prime Minister regularly refuses to meet with the mayor, but also a government that's been dealing with the chaos of Brexit and neglecting core business like policing, like the NHS, like public investment, like transport, like air quality, like skills. If Boris Johnson had operated in that environment, I just dread what could have happened to our city. And I think it's really important that we continue to work together to try and do the best for our city, even though we have the most anti-London government I can remember in my lifetime.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Bacon.
Mr. Mayor, earlier on, in answers to questions to Assembly Member Boff, you said that your administration had no failings. Now, that may have been a rush of blood, it may be a spur of the moment. Do you stand by that?
I think the question was to me.
It was to you, and you said you had no failings.
I'm sure on reflection we can always do things better and differently. I'd go to bed every night reflecting on the day and thinking how I could have done things differently and improving that the next day. I'm sure there's things we could have done in a different way. I wish, for example, that the previous chair of Crossrail had been held to task far more by DFT and TfL and didn't rely upon the information that he'd given us. And we brought in independent experts sooner than we did when he brought them in summer, because that's when the new trustees got onto the board, the new board members of Crossrail. We had a reason to get them on earlier, we'd, I'm sure, uncovered more stuff. So there's things all the time that you think of that you can improve. And I probably wish I'd be more effective at lobbying the government to realise that violent crime is a national issue that demands national solutions, and asked, maybe earlier for Cobra to convene. So there's always things you reflect on that you can do differently and stuff. And I'm sure, when I'm lying in bed, there are other things I can think of.
Okay, well that's fair enough. I think that's a revision of what you said earlier on, which I think is reasonable. Do you regret your failure in preventing the increases in violent crime in London?
This is a really important point in relation to, you have a situation where in the course of the last few weeks, You've had the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council criticising the lack of national leadership. You've got chief constables from across the country talking about a national issue in the increase in violent crime. But also you've got, finally, the government accepting there is a link between cuts made by them and the increase in violent crime. As far as we in London are concerned, we've done a huge amount which other parts of the country are now learning from. So I think we should be encouraged by the fact that it was me, unlike the previous mayor, who froze or cut council tax, increased council tax in all 3 years to support our police to manage the decline in police numbers. That's led to the new violent crime task force making more than 3,500 arrests, taking 1,500 weapons off our streets and more. It's paid for making sure we've got a new violence reduction unit doing a huge amount of good, bringing different services together. But also we have the Mayor's Young Londoners Fund supporting Londoners to give them constructive things to do rather than get involved in criminal gangs. So I think actually in London, there's always more we can do, but I think we're doing a huge amount, which by the way, when I attend the Home Secretary's Serious Violent Crime Task Force, other parts of the country are emulating. And you had a situation just 2 weeks ago where the Chancellor referred to the Violence Reduction Unit, England's first in London, asking others to emulate that by the funding that he's announced.
You talked about police resources. You mentioned it many times, Mr Mayor. And you know, because we said it in public, we said it at the Budget Committee, that we support your call for more funding for the Metropolitan Police. But
that's not true. That's not the case, though, because you voted against our budgets.
Ah, yes, you know very well, Mr Mayor, that you can't vote for or against a budget line by line.
Well, I mean,
we have said it umpteen times in this room, both at Budget Committee and at Mayor's Question Time and in plenaries repeatedly, that we do support.
But Chair, there's a problem with that.
Hang on, let me finish my point, Mr Mayor. That we do support more funding for the Metropolitan Police. But there are things that you could do yourself. You do have the ability to move money around with your budgets, and you've chosen not to do that. Why is that, Mr.
Well, Chair, two things. One is the same members who now claim to support me giving more money to the police supported the previous mayor who froze council tax at a time he knew that the amount of money coming from the central government was dropping. So from 2010, when Number 10 had a certain advisor advising them on youth and crime, from 2010, the amount of monies coming to London from central government's been dropping. So the previous mayor could have planned for that, increased council tax to support our police, to manage the decline, to make sure it doesn't go down, but also to divert monies elsewhere to support our police, failed to do so, supported by the very same people who now support me when it comes to the resources I want to give to the police claimed today. So rewriting history doesn't help you, number one. Number two, we're already seeing in London monies from elsewhere being used in the police service, monies from business rates being used to support our police. Police officers from roads and transport being moved from them to support the violent crime task force. So we already are prioritising resources to give the police the maximum support we can do.
Mr Mayor, I know you like to deflect when people ask you questions and talk about your predecessor, or talk about the government, or talk about rap music, or whatever else it is. But you do have the power to move your money around. And the Conservative group did table an amendment without any cost on the taxpayer at all. You could have moved £83 million into MOPAC, which would have funded an extra 1,378 police officers, and you refused to do that. Why was that?
Because the numbers don't stack up.
Yes, they do stack up, Mr Mayor. You know that that's not true.
Chair, at least sometimes let me ask the question and step in without crossing your arms and watching as a spectator. The situation is this. I'm asked a question, I try and answer, then I'm interrupted.
Mr Mayor, my job is to hold the ring. You're a capable debater, he's a capable debater. You don't need me to intervene under those circumstances.
Mr Mayor, you cannot, it's not possible to table an amendment in this place to the budget unless it is fact-checked by the Finance Department in advance to make sure that the numbers do stack up.
So it's interesting,
There's all sorts of reasons why you might not want to support it, but because the numbers don't add up, cannot be one of them.
So here's the ridiculousness of this proposition. On the one hand, you've got Conservatives criticising the very same officers who prepare the figures and fact-check them. On the other hand, you've got other members of the Assembly holding up as a virtuous thing the fact that officers check the figures. So I'm pleased to see that Assembly Member Bacon is holding to task Assembly Member Boff for criticising officers.
On a point of personal explanation,
yes.
At no point did I criticise an officer, I criticised the mayor, because it's your foul up, not an officer's.
Well, Chair, by the same token, Chair.
Yes. The Mayor is deliberately wasting time here by bringing
hold on a
officers into it. It is a procedural rule that all budget amendments tabled in this place have to be fact-checked by the Finance Department to make sure that the budget balances, which is the only reason why I mentioned officers in that context, because the Mayor said something that factually was not true and not possible. Assembly Member Boff didn't mention officers one bit. It was the Mayor who mentioned officers and said that Assembly Member Boff had made allegations.
I'm shocked, Chair, that you sit
are
silently by,
deliberately trying
because
to deflect
the figures
away
that
from
I
my
present,
questions.
are
Chairman,
prepared
can we
by
please stop the clock?
officers.
Can we please
They're
stop the
prepared
clock?
by officers.
Whose figures are they?
Hang on.
They're figures prepared by officers.
We've stopped the
And
clock.
so
Let him
they
just
can't have it both
drift on.
ways, Chair.
Can we come back to the question?
I don't know what the both ways are that you're talking about. As I understand it, on his point of order, Assemblymember Boff said he only mentioned you, and Assemblymember Bacon says that figures which are presented to the Budget Committee have to be fact-checked.
Well, let me explain, Chair, so it helps you in your ruling. So Assemblymember Boff said I had dodgy figures.
Yes, he did.
And the point I make, in a respectful manner, is those figures are prepared by officers. So indirectly, he's calling the officers dodgy.
No.
Right? Now, Senator Bacon is claiming that his figures can't be wrong because they're prepared by, by officers.
No, sorry,
well,
Chairman, again.
Got sauce for the goose, Chair. No, sauce for the goose.
Mr. Chairman,
No,
point of order.
we're going off at a tangent. This is
exactly what he wants.
This is turning into a sixth form debate. Although I quite like sixth form debates, I'm not sure that Londoners want to see their time wasted in that. So can we stick to
Can
the
we get back to the
Yeah.
point? Right. So
time
we
we had a
stick to the
decent
point,
ruling from the Chair.
Mr. Chairman, which is what we were trying to do in the first place before the Mayor deliberately tried to sabotage it. Now, the budget amendment
It's not
that was
going well, is
tabled
it,
by
Gareth?
the
It's
Conservative
not going well,
group,
is it?
the budget amendment which was tabled by the Conservative group without any cost to the taxpayer would have transferred £83 million directly into MOPAC, which would have allowed you to provide an extra 1,378 police officers. And you refused to accept it. Why?
Firstly, Chair, I'm astonished that the Assembly doesn't realise I don't get a vote on that budget. It's Assembly members, and I thought as Chair you'd correct him on that point. That's the first point. So I wasn't in the room when the vote was taken. And if the Assembly member is not able to persuade colleagues to vote for his motion, he's watching Theresa May too much. And what he should do is try and persuade colleagues to vote for his amendment. Had I been in the room and had I had a vote, I'd have voted against that amendment, because it doesn't recognise what policing means. Policing means having funded in perpetuity. It means not cutting resources from elsewhere that are really important in providing other services that City Hall does. It means making sure we can invest in the preventative services that were so lacking under the previous mayor that need there. But it means making sure that we've got a budget that adds up, not just this year, but in years to come. I'm not in favour of making cuts in other important services that City Hall provides for the sake of getting a headline to suit a mayoral campaign from some member Bailey. What I'm in favour is of supporting our police whatever way I can, either financially or by giving them the support and powers they need. And since I've been Mayor, Chair, and the figures will confirm this, our police from City Hall have got more resources in my 3 years as a consequence of tax raising powers and other switch spending from business rates than under the previous Mayor's 8 years. And that's because I believe in supporting the police and you know, putting my money where my mouth is. So in the first year, we increased council tax to the maximum I was allowed to do by the law to give the police funding. I was criticised by the government because the previous mayor the year before hadn't raised the council tax as he was allowed to do. London suffered because of decisions made by the previous mayor, just in the year he made them, but in the subsequent year as well. In my second year, I raised council tax to the maximum I was allowed to do, £12, plus used business rates money to support our police. In my third year, I raised council tax to the maximum allowed, £24, and also used resources from elsewhere as well. So I'm supporting our police on a regular basis, not simply by virtue of an amendment for a press release to get some attention.
Mr. Chairman, the Mayor has just confirmed in this chamber that he made a choice not to support the extra 1,378 police officers that would have been funded by our budget amendment that would have had no cost to the taxpayer. And I think that's very noteworthy, so I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much.
Well, Chair, is that a question? Again, are you making a ruling that speeches are allowed from...
Do you know, if I had to make ruling on people who grandstand here and spend their time making speeches rather than asking questions, we'd never get anywhere at all. The truth of the matter is that members must manage their own time. If he chooses to phrase a question in a way which I can't know in advance,
it was a speech.
No, if I can't know in advance whether or not he's going to come to a question, how can I possibly make a ruling?
Well, you can give me a chance to respond.
Only if he asks a question. Right, let's go
But
to
he's
the...
grandstanding, Chair.
No. Let's go to the next question, please, which is from Assembly Member Pidgeon on community policing. And let's hope that it's proper question and answer.
Thank you, Chair. The introduction of Partnership Plus last month is an operational decision made by the Metropolitan Police Commissioner as it relates to the deployment of officers. The scheme allows local authorities to purchase additional police officers at a reduced rate, allowing local authorities to focus the work of officers to their local priorities. It replaces the previous Met Patrol Plus scheme. The scheme has changed because the government has already forced the Metropolitan Police to make savings of £850 million, with a further £263 million worth of cuts still required by 2022. These cuts are having a real impact, forcing officer numbers down from 33,260 in 2010 to 29,869 now. On top of that, community support officers and police staff numbers are also down. Under the previous scheme, officers were provided on a so-called buy one, get one free basis to local authorities, but in reality, this cost the Metropolitan Police an additional £9 million each year, an amount which, due to government cuts, simply isn't sustainable. At a time when the Met is facing increasing demands, a lack of government funding and falling officer numbers, the Commissioner was clear that greater flexibility was needed over police officers in order to respond to critical instances such as violent crime. Nevertheless, the Commissioner remains committed to working in partnership, recognising that tackling local priorities requires cooperation. Therefore, the Commissioner has revised the scheme, alleviating the issue of cost and inflexibility, while maintaining the principle that local authorities can invest in local policing. The new scheme is sustainable for the Metropolitan Police, yet it enables local authorities to purchase police officers at a reduced rate of £57,000 per constable. This represents a discount of over 21% on the full cost of an officer. Any purchased officers will be additional to the basic command unit workforce complement and will be ring-fenced from normal aid provision or other local abstraction. The Met Police will continue to honour all existing Met Patrol Plus agreements until their natural expiry. There will also be a 3-month transition period beginning at the end of March to enable local authorities whose contracts expire time to decide whether to invest in the new scheme. Partnership Plus will enable local authorities to continue to purchase additional police officers while remaining viable for the Met Police.
Thank you very much for providing that detail. Under the old Patrol Plus scheme, boroughs could, as you say, benefit from effectively a buy one, get one free offer, which basically was a 50% discount. Under this scheme, they're only being offered about 21% discount. From the boroughs I've been talking to, they think that this isn't a good deal. And you can't even guarantee that the officers that a borough purchases will actually remain in that borough. So do you understand that some boroughs may now walk away from the scheme entirely?
I'm clear that the Met Commissioner's got a difficult task to do. As I said, the numbers of officers have gone down from 33,000 plus to lower than 30,000. And there's an impact in relation to both costs, Met Police costs, because they subsidise this scheme, and flexibility. And so I fully support the decision made by the Commissioner. I can understand if the scheme is less attractive to local authorities because they're getting less discount, they may decide not to do so and use the money elsewhere with wardens or other things that they can afford to do. What's clear is for us to realise that this is a subsidy given to councils by the Met Police budget, but also there's a lack of direction and control because local authorities get to say where the officers go. And I can understand at a time where there are more officers, there was an ability to have inflexibility and to subsidise this. When there are fewer officers and less money, the Met Police Commissioner must be able to use her officers as she sees fit.
Do you think this new scheme should also maybe cover PCSOs? Surely allowing boroughs to purchase PCSOs at a discounted rate would also help with some of the issues around vacancies with PCSO posts. Is that something you would put to the Commissioner to consider?
No, because the Commissioner is quite clear that she needs more constables. She needs more police officers. So although we're recruiting community support officers, that's to fill the current cohort we have. You'll be aware, in 2010, we used to have in each ward 1 designated sergeant, 2 designated ward officers and 3 community support officers. By the time I became mayor, that was down to 1 and 1. And so it's really important that I was able to increase the amount of dedicated ward officers to 2, 1 community support officer as well. What the Met Police Commissioner doesn't believe we should be doing is recruiting a cohort of many more thousands of CSOs because we need to recruit many more thousands of police officers. That's the priority.
but you have got vacancies in PCSOs, and I think you are looking to start some sort of recruitment programme.
Oh, we are. Sorry, beg your pardon. Sorry, it's my
So
fault.
therefore, I'm just wondering whether actually having an offer to local authorities that might be attractive might actually help for them to help pay for some of these posts.
My understanding, speaking to council leaders, is because a community support officer hasn't got the same powers of arrest as a police constable and can't do the same things, some councils are rather using the money rather than paying for a CSO, but to pay for a borough warden or other forms of uniformed council staff who've got similar powers to a CSO, and the council has more control over. I think some councils are going down that route rather than a CSO route.
Okay, I'm wondering whether you might consider working with the Commissioner to review this new offer to at least ensure that the officers that boroughs could buy will actually remain in their own borough rather than going to the wider merged BCU, and whether potentially PCSOs could be considered as part of this in the future.
The Commissioner is always looking for new ideas, and I'm happy to pass on the words of the Assembly Member to the Commissioner and to Deputy Mayor Linden as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, that was an exemplary session. Assembly Member O'Connell.
Chair, I'm not sure if you're having a pop at Bacon or me, but it's, but I think Mr. Bacon could learn a lot from Ms. Pigeon.
Assembly Member O'Connell.
Returning to that earlier subject, if I may, Mayor, I'll give you a more graphic example. I'm proud to be a member of the Croydon Town Centre Bid Board in an advisory basis. Under their budget last year, under the previous scheme, they were able to add, in essence, 6 officers to the town centre to keep Croydon Town Centre safe within the budget that they had. Within the budget, the same budget this year, under the new scheme, they could buy 2.25 officers. They could add 2 officers onto the town centre. This is a great disappointment to them and to their subscribers, the businesses in Croydon. So can I support Caroline and ask you very much, with your discussions with the Commissioner, to ask that this scheme is reviewed. Now, I do understand the reasons you gave earlier for the changes in the scheme, but the movement of officers and the reduction of officers for bids and for local authorities is very difficult. And I just wish that perhaps when you reconsider the scheme, perhaps the next iteration of the scheme, which we may see next year, it will be a better scheme than this one.
Well, Chair, only if there's more support financially from the government and the Met Police Service has many more thousands of officers, because I think the point is, when we had 33,000 plus officers, you can understand why, inverted commas, some surplus officers can be doing additional policing that bids and boroughs would want them to do. When you've got so few officers, the Met Police Commissioner and borough commanders must have priority over the fewer officers to do what's operationally required rather than what's an added extra. And that's why I think there's a problem. If there comes a stage in the future where we get to 33,000 plus officers and we've got resources, then I'm sure we'd be able to consider that scheme. But it means the Met Police Service subsidising financially councils and bids, but also having less flexibility operationally with what they can do with those officers. So I fully support the Commissioner's conundrum and the decisions he's taken. If the question is, can we get a future stage to reconsider when there's more money, more officers? Of course we will.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question is from Assembly Member Bailey and relates to opportunities.
Thank you, Chair. London gave me and my family the opportunities we needed to fulfil our potential. A secure job for my dad that paid a decent wage, a council home giving my family security, and my parents a chance to save for a place of their own home. A decent state school for me and my siblings, an affordable university education, and a supportive community in which to grow up in. My burning ambition as Mayor is to ensure that all Londoners get the opportunities they need to fulfil their potential too. And I'm extremely proud that we're already delivering tangible results to make this happen, despite opposition from Conservatives on the Assembly. We've started building a record number of new social rent and council homes. We've frozen Transport for London fares and introduced the unlimited hopper to make commuting more affordable to millions of Londoners struggling with the cost of living. We've supported London's businesses to create more than 200,000 new jobs since I became Mayor, presided over an increase in the London living wage from £9.40 an hour to £10.55 an hour, and worked to ensure more employers pay the London living wage. We've launched the £45 million Young Londoners Fund to create positive opportunities for young Londoners, already helping over 63,000 young people. We're ensuring that from this year, any Londoner who is earning less than the London living wage will be able to get fully funded skills training to help them get out and get a better work. We're ensuring that our £71 million European Social Fund programme will support some of London's most disadvantaged Londoners to gain the skills they need to get good quality jobs. And we're using the power of culture and the creative industries to improve opportunities, with my flagship projects offering chances for young people to take part in positive activities. And I've campaigned against the government's chaotic handling of Brexit, which poses a big threat to opportunities for the next generation. All of our progress in London has come against the backdrop of a government supported by the Conservatives on the Assembly that is reducing opportunities for the next generation with its failed austerity agenda. This includes cuts to youth services, leading to youth centres closing down across our city, cuts to local councils, who face a real terms funding cut of 60%, cuts to Sure Start centres, which give a head start in life to those who need it the most, cuts to funding for our schools and further education, cuts to funding for new affordable housing in London, and real-term cuts to working age benefits. It's worth pointing out that a special advisor for youth in crime in Downing Street, Assemblymember Bailey, helped implement many of these damaging cuts.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to concentrate on the opportunity there is in the police force for recruitment and retention and career advancement. So currently, as you mentioned earlier, 26% of the police force are female ladies, but when you look at the detective rate around detective constables, 37%, which has been a great success for the Met. Is there any lessons that they can learn there about retention of staff and also putting people through the right support so they can boost their career?
Can I check, when you said ladies, do you mean women?
Yeah, I said women beforehand, yes.
Okay. So women, I think he meant women, not ladies, by the way. So I think there are lessons we can learn in relation to mentoring and sponsorship for female officers, but also Black, Asian, minority ethnic officers, to get them up the progression in the Met Police service. We're fortunate that the leader of the team is a woman. The current leader, who's soon retiring, of the National Police Council, Chief Counsels, is a woman, and the NCA has a woman leader as well. But there's a role for sponsorship and mentoring. The Our Time programme we've set up in City Hall that the Met Police Service, the London Fire Brigade and others are now taking advantage of will help, I hope, that next generation of officers move to detective levels. The direct entry scheme also is encouraging, because it's leading to more women who are graduates come into the police service. You can now become a detective directly into the police service rather than the normal route up. And so the Met Police Service are trying innovative ways to get more female police officers, women police officers, being detectives and having other roles, and making progress in the Met Police Service. I want the Met Police Service to be the best employer in the world, particularly for police officers.
Okay. Are some of those lessons being ported over to BAME communities? Because there's a goal in London, I think a shared goal, to have the police force more accurately reflect the population in London. Is there anything specific that we're doing to pursue people from BAME communities, BAME background, to come into the police force and then also hold on to them, to retain them so they can go up the ranks?
So the Met Police Service is doing a lot of work to try and make sure that we recruit from London's diverse communities. Unfortunately, one of the things the police have had to do temporarily is to remove the requirement to be a London resident to be eligible to join the police service, to try and get more police officers joining. And so obviously if you're recruiting from an area that's less diverse, it could lead to the pipeline coming through being less diverse. The Commissioner, the Deputy Commissioner and all those in charge of recruiting are keen to make sure we recruit a diverse workforce. That means not just more women, more ethnic minority recruits as well, and other parts of our community not properly represented in the police service. And once we have them, to make sure they progress up the police service. One of the things the Met Police noticed was that often people express an interest in joining the police service and for a variety of reasons don't carry it through, don't end up joining the police service. And we're trying to see what the issue is. Is there an issue with the test? Is there an issue with the delay? People have got to get a job and pay the bills. Is there an issue with the training? And so they're looking at what the issues are by speaking to people who've sort of not carried it through about what can be done to keep them going through. And so they are trying everything they possibly can, including learning lessons from other police forces around the country. The bad news is there is no police force around the country that does this brilliantly, so we can't just nick the idea from their relation to this. But there is nothing that's not being considered by the police service to make it more diverse.
Okay, just one last small point. The police cadets has been very successful, particularly when you look at diversity. Is there any initiative to help those young people consider a career in the police, as the police again looked at why that services find it far easier to recruit from a diverse background?
Well, Chair, I have the pleasure of spending time with police officers every day, but last week I had the pleasure of spending an afternoon at the Met Police Excellence Awards. and there were great cadets there from all across London. We have more than 5,000 police cadets across London. In fact, one of the awards was to our police cadets, and one of the recipients had now gone on to become a police officer, only 18 years old. And we are trying to encourage both in the fire service and the police service a way in, gliding people in from becoming a cadet first, if you're a police cadet or a London Fire Service cadet, to joining the service, whether it's a fire service or the police service. And for the fire service, as a consequence of City Hall funding in my recent budget, opposed by Conservatives, we're going to increase the number of fire service cadets across London, so every single borough will have fire cadets in them as well. So we are trying to learn the lessons to get more young people doing constructive things, but also using it as a way of getting better recruitment into our police service and fire service too.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Duval.
Mr Mayor, I feel that the Assembly member might need to employ me as a researcher, because I think the Assembly did a report on the very issues that he raised. It's a very good report.
Can I just say, if you want a referee for that job, I'm not sure I'll give you a good reference to be the researcher for that guy.
I don't think so.
You want to work for somebody with a future.
But, you know, in terms of the question that was put to you, Mr Mayor, let's cut to the chase. The difference to be made in short of untapped talent, we touched on this earlier, isn't one of the biggest problems that we face in a number of days' time is moving to no deal. Now, I don't know whether that Assembly member there, because I think he's been asked. He's been asked where he stands on the position of no deal or May's deal, or what does he believe in, or what they all think over there. And no, I don't want to be pessimistic about it, but there are risks with no deal about opportunities for young people and the talent pipeline that the Assembly member usually refers to in this issue. But even more, right, the rhetoric in this place and the reality on the ground, Mr Mayor, I want to bring to your attention a school, a secondary school in my constituency that's got 19 school assistants. We rightly talk about and value the support that we give to teachers in our schools. We very rarely give it to support staff. They're going down to 19, from 19 to 8. 8 because of the direct consequences of government policy in reducing opportunities to probably the most people that need it, learning needs students who get the support of those school issues. That's the real issue that we face, and I'm surprised that some of the issues, important issues that he raises within the police, but glosses over other challenges that we face here in London. Do you think the member needs to think about some of these lines of questioning that he's putting to you, or widen out some of the issues, but also he needs a reality check of what's happening on the ground in London that people are facing in their everyday struggles around opportunities?
Well, absolutely. I think I'm a high years a researcher, but I think you're right. I mean, so one of the things that not just about police service but others are concerned about are whether people have this are match fit to apply for the job. And the people you're talking about get them match fit by supporting them in school, by giving them good careers advice, by having them fulfil their potential, and then they become ready to be able to to apply for these jobs and to get these jobs. And that's why cutting support for our schools, reducing support for youth work, reducing the amount of support staff in schools, lack of assistance to those children with special educational needs, a situation where head teachers aren't getting the support they need to stop a child reaching a situation where he or she's having to be excluded, all contribute to a situation where young Londoners aren't having their potential fulfilled. And you'd have thought anybody running to be the mayor of this great city would stand up for London and call out the government rather than being a patron.
No, you're
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much for your question, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
Right.
Now that's an interventionist chair. It's funny it's funny how he wakes up now, isn't it?
Don't give me any of this, Mr Mayor. I bend over backwards to be objective. If only you knew how difficult it is for me to resist. But nevertheless, I've been objective.
The chair's true colours have been exposed there.
You must not mention Assembly members.
He's leaving anyway. He's leaving. He's had enough. He's had enough. He's leaving the pitch. He's got the red card from the mayor. Red card.
No.
There he goes. Let's all give him a wave. Let's all give him a wave, everyone. Let's all wave him by.
This is abuse of process.
Well, Chair, we now know he has a weak constitution as well as weak policies.
Do you know, that's absolutely disgraceful, Mr. Mayor.
I think he is a disgrace.
That you should use this place as a platform for this. I've just said to my deputy that next year she's going to have a very difficult time indeed next year. Anyway, Assembly Member Sahota.
Well, check.
Yes.
Can I just say, I could have said his chances of winning are just gone down the toilet, but I didn't say that. I didn't say that, did I?
Do you know you can do better than that?
Yeah, let's rise a bit higher.
Right. So can you with your candidate.
Assembly Member Sahota. His question.
Chair, can I thank Dr. Sahota for this question? And it's simply unacceptable that the young people in London and across the UK are experiencing a higher death rate from asthma compared to other European countries. Our illegally polluted air is known to increase the risk of asthma and trigger asthma attacks, which is why I am determined to take the action needed to improve air quality once and for all. To help clean up our toxic air, we've already delivered the toxicity charge in central London for the oldest polluting vehicles and are cleaning up the bus and taxi fleets. These measures are working. In central London, we've seen a reduction in NO2 concentrations of around 8%. The 7 low-emission bus zones delivered so far have reduced bus NOx emissions by an average 90%. Despite opposition from the Conservatives, on the 8th of April, I will launch the ultra-low emission zone, ULEZ, in central London. From this date, vehicles travelling into the zone will need to meet tough emission standards or pay a daily charge. It is expected that within the first 2 years, the central London ULEZ will reduce harmful nitrogen oxides emissions from road transport by 45%, improving air quality for millions of Londoners. TfL's Healthy Streets approach and Liverpool Neighbourhoods programmes will help to further reduce children's exposure to poor air quality, as well as making it easier and safer to walk and cycle to school. Our air quality audit programmes are helping deliver improvements at 50 schools, and we're working with the boroughs to roll it out more widely. Our draft and plan is tackling air quality through tough standards for new buildings and by ensuring that the location of new education and childcare facilities reduces exposure to poor air quality. While air pollution is a key factor in the exacerbation of asthma, high death rates are also partly due to a lack of awareness about the seriousness of the condition and patients missing out on basic asthma care. I'm in regular discussions, not just with Dr. Sahota, but with other senior health leaders in London, and have endorsed the Healthy London Partnerships #AskAboutAsthma campaign, which supports London's health and care professionals to reduce hospital admissions by ensuring every young person with asthma has an asthma management plan, knows how to use their inhaler, and has an annual asthma review.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Of course, worldwide, 9 million people die due to poor air quality, and 7.3 million people die because of tobacco smoking. But yet we have a choice about smoking or not smoking. Have no choice about whether the air we breathe in. And I think, to be correct, this is another list of successes you can add to your list, right? That you've taken air quality seriously, unlike your predecessor who ignored the facts. So I want to congratulate you on the great effort you make in this regard. But of course, we know, right, that there's a huge variation across London about asthma admissions and asthma attacks. What are you doing to look at this inequality which exists across London?
It's a big issue, and you're right. Many of us who have asthma have got no choice, and you can't sort of patient blame in relation to this issue, and so it is a big concern I've got, particularly when I look at those who have those who suffer the worst consequences from poor air are the poorest Londoners. And that's one of the reasons why we're promoting a range of policies. And I make this point about the ultra-low emission zone that's been opposed by the Conservatives. This will benefit the poorest Londoners the most.
Point of order.
Understanding Order 4.4, the Mayor has repeatedly said this morning that the Conservative group is opposed to the ultra-low emission zone, and that is a matter of fact that we are not. It's been in the public domain repeatedly. We published 2 policy papers on this, the first in January of 2017, the second one in October of 2017. The ultra-low emission zone, which actually was not conceived by this Mayor, but by his predecessor, Boris Johnson, was supported by all parties, and we haven't resolved from that position. Our opposition is to the Mayor rushing it in a year early and expanding it to the North and South Circular. It's very important to get that onto the record. It's not something that's been hidden. It's been in the public domain for 2 years. And the Mayor and the Labour group have been deliberately misrepresenting that, and I think it's important that that is correct.
Well, let me be clear, Chair. It's really important because that's just not correct. The Conservatives oppose my plans on the ultra-low emission zone. The Conservatives oppose the the ultra-low emission zone begin on the 8th of April. That means Conservatives oppose us fixing the air as soon as we can. So the Conservatives will have their head in the sand while the air in London gets worse. So the Conservatives do oppose my plans for the ultra-low emission zone. And he should use his time. And this is again, the Chair being complicit in an abusive process.
We do have rules here. They may appear to have deteriorated at this meeting. I'm afraid, despite what I said at the beginning of the meeting, the infection has spread.
Standing Order 4.4, Chairman. The Mayor has just repeated that we are opposed to the ultra-low emission zone. It is a matter of verifiable fact that we are not opposed to the ultra-low emission zone. The policy papers where we have said that we acknowledge and accept the ultra-low emission zone, which are in the public domain, were published in January 2017 and October 2017. We also supported the consultation that was undertaken by this Mayor's predecessor, which had exactly the same ultra-low emission zone, but it was going to be introduced 1 year later than his proposal.
All right.
I've set out our position. The Mayor's misrepresented it again seconds after I corrected it.
Okay. Can we move on from arguing amongst ourselves, he said this, he said that? Perhaps you could deal with the important question that has been raised by Dr. Sahota.
Well, Dr. Sahota, I mean, what you've just seen now is a smokescreen from the Conservatives failing to take action to clean up the air that's helped causes the asthma. The Conservatives are opposed to my plans to bring in the ULEZ on the 8th of April. The Conservatives are opposed to us cleaning up the air sooner rather than later. And the Conservatives would have a situation where we have polluting vehicles coming into the heart of London, making our air worse for a long period of time. But thanks to our policies, opposed by the Conservatives, the ULEZ will begin on the 8th of April. And when it's a success, they will give the impression they supported it all along.
Well, Mr. Mayor, look, thank you very much for that very strong statement and of great leadership in this area, and which asthma sufferers across London will very much appreciate. But also, let me say that asthma sufferers need to take their medications every day. Are you confident that the government plans for maintaining the supplies of these medications after Brexit are enough to give people confidence that they will have the medicines available to them?
This is a really important question. I know you've been heckled by the Brexiteers on the Conservative group, but it's really important that we plan for the possibility of leaving the European Union without any deal whatsoever. There are concerns about the availability of medicines. Many of our medicines are imported through the European Union. I've been told by the NHS they've got enough medicines for 6 months, and they're advising patients and others not to stockpile medicines. I hold regular discussions with the NHS. Fiona Twycross chairs the London Resilience Forum and meets regularly with colleagues from the NHS. And so I'm confident at the moment that the information we've been given, and we rely upon the information we're given, the government has plans in relation to no-deal Brexit and the availability of asthma pumps to those who need them, like me, like many of your patients and many Londoners, particularly the poorest Londoners, who will benefit the most from my plans for ULEZ opposed by the Tories. We need to make sure the government doesn't have a no-Brexit situation, and we support all Londoners who will be affected by a no-Brexit deal.
Good. Mr. Mayor, about 12 children die from asthma in London every year, and 170 children are admitted to the intensive care unit every year because of asthma. A new scheme providing all state schools in Merton and Wandsworth with emergency asthma kits could help this. Do you support this programme being expanded right across London?
I think it's a cracking scheme. It's in my area. And St George's and NHS Wandsworth and Merton deserve huge credit for this scheme. What this scheme will mean, it's really, really good, is that they will provide an emergency inhaler, but also raise awareness of asthma in schools by educating schools how to help children who may have asthma, what to do if there's an asthma attack. And what I'd like to see is this rolled out across London. We've seen how it can work in Wandsworth and Merton. And you've said, as you explained, these are illnesses caused for no fault of the patient that are preventable, but also some of the worst consequences are also preventable as well. And so this is a good example, and thank you for raising this example to our attention. And I'll make sure we do what we can to amplify it.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Arnold.
Yes, Chair, point of personal explanation. Can I just add, as an asthma sufferer, I recently could not get a script fully. I had to go back a second time, and there was another drug related to my asthma condition, which I had to go to about 4 major outlets from a national chain before I could get half of that script being filled. So I would urge you to pick this up, Mayor, because it is an issue that now people are experiencing.
Chair, that's noted. We'll follow that up.
Well, I think, okay. Assembly Member Copley has a question on Help to Buy.
Thank you, Chair. I've been clear that all developers must build their fair share of social rented and genuinely affordable homes. This applies to everyone, including those developers whose businesses rely on Help to Buy. Help to Buy has been a major feature of London's housing market since 2016, when 40% equity loans were introduced. Last year, more than 5,000 households in London used Help to Buy, and in some boroughs, over a third of new homes were bought using it. This means that last year, the government invested £848 million in Help to Buy equity loans in London. That's more than the total annual funding of around £700 million that they've given to our affordable homes programme. While Help to Buy has helped some Londoners onto the housing ladder and helped buildings to continue after the financial crisis, its scale risks pushing up prices and makes it unsustainable in the long term. There are far better ways we could spend the money that goes to Help to Buy, but we're now in a difficult position as a result of the government's failure to manage the scheme properly, which has left developers addicted to the current approach. That's why I've been clear to the government that we must see a smooth transition to a successor scheme that delivers far greater public benefit. This successor scheme should support new housing supply without pushing up prices. It should incentivise better practices and higher standards among house builders. Crucially, I'm also clear that home builders who benefit directly from state financial support through Help to Buy must deliver far higher proportions of affordable homes. In future, if the government is willing to spend this level of money on building new homes, it must be directed towards genuinely affordable housing. My team will make this clear in any discussions with government officials about the future of the scheme, and City Hall is happy to work with ministers on developing a successor scheme that achieves this goal.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Mayor. And I think it's worth highlighting some of the big figures in terms of profits here. So it was reported recently that large house builders Persimmon and Taylor Wimpey posted record profits of £1.1 billion and £811 million respectively, and that these have been inflated by the government's Help to Buy scheme. Persimmon made a 13% increase in profit in 2018 versus 2017, and 48% of their customers used Help to Buy, although they are less active in London. Taylor Wimpey's profits were up 18%, and 29% of their London sales were with Help to Buy. Barclay Homes made £913 million profit before tax in 2018, and has increased its profits every year since 2014. And yet, in 2017-18, developers in total contributed just 1,467 affordable home starts in London through Section 106 agreements, compared to the record 12,555 funded by City Hall. And I'm pleased to hear in response to Assembly Member, your response to Assembly Member Berry's question, that the percentage of affordable homes being granted planning permission is increasing thanks to your threshold approach. But are there any other further levers you can use to ensure that private developers contribute their fair share?
Well, I think the figures you've quoted in your question should wake people up to the broken housing market, because developers are doing very, very well, and landowners are doing very, very well, but those who so desperately need a new home on an average salary are doing very, very badly, and the lack of genuine affordable homes should be a source of worry to all of us. You speak to big employers who employ people on a decent salary, they can't afford to live in London. And that's why we need to build far more genuinely affordable homes. That's one of the reasons why we ditched the dodgy definition. So we're doing a number of things, even without the powers that I need, without the resources that I need to try and help this along. Some of it is in the new draft London plan, which is currently going through the examination in public. Some of it's in the housing strategy, but it's also working with councils who decide the scheme is below a certain threshold that don't come to us. And so speaking to councils as well can lead to some progress as well. There are many good councils as well, but also speaking to developers. I think developers understand there is a problem in the housing market, and they recognise that actually the counter-cyclical way housing works gives an opportunity in relation to more affordable homes. And I'm hoping with an additional grant from the government to housing providers, developers, rather than them relying on cross-subsidy, we can have more genuinely affordable homes that way as well. That's one of the points I made to the Chancellor when I last met him.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
And the next question is from Assembly Member O'Connell and relates to Croydon Town Centre.
Thank you, Chair. Croydon's Town Centre is an opportunity area in our draft on the plan and has a key role to play in delivering good growth for Londoners due to its strategic location in the tram's Brighton mainline corridor with important links to central London, Gatwick and beyond. A key scheme for Croydon's transformation is, of course, the Croydon Limited Partnership's mixed-use redevelopment of the Whitgift Centre. Good progress has been made since the outline planning consent was achieved in January 2018. In September last year, the CPO process commenced, which is crucial for the land acquisition process for construction of the new development. My understanding is that whilst the start on site date has slipped from autumn 2019 and a new date is yet to be confirmed, the developers have said they remain committed to the scheme and still plan for its open in late 2023. Structural changes in retail and the uncertainty related to Brexit will undoubtedly have an effect on this project. I also understand that developers are currently refining the proposals to ensure that they're best equipped to deal with the challenges facing the retail sector. Despite the setback, I remain optimistic about the regeneration of Croydon Town Centre. In April last year, the Croydon Growth Zone was initiated. This will capture growth in local business rates for 16 years and help to fund the £500 million package of critical infrastructure required to deliver the wholesale renewal of the retail core. At least 10,000 new homes of different tenures will be built and 22,500 new long-term jobs, with a further 5,000 jobs created during the construction phase. The GLA and TfL continue to work closely with Croydon Council on the growth zone to ensure that the required infrastructure is delivered at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I'm running out of time. I
beg your pardon,
I accept that. I've lived and breathed this for some years now. But, however, I think your response, which I welcome, is somewhat of the sunny side. It's not an overstatement to say that I believe the prosperity of Croydon and large swathes of South London is predicated on this successful scheme. This is a cross-party lobbying point, and I have a Labour council colleague in the chamber today. However, there is major concern about the slippage in this scheme. This scheme is going to deliver something like 1,000 jobs towards your target, something like 15,000 construction jobs, something like 5,000 retail and office jobs, and there's real concern locally. Mr. Mayor, you did talk about earlier comparisons about pulling everyone together, all the key players in one room and knocking heads together. You used the Cobra example. The previous incumbent here held meetings in this building when things were looking a bit tricky, frankly. He called in the top people, be it the council, be it TfL, be it elsewhere, and said, we need to move this on. Mr. Mayor, in the context that there is a delay and a significant slippage putting this at risk, will you call a meeting in this building and try to put your mayoral pressure to get this project moving?
Chair, I'm always happy to use my convening powers. Can I, with your agreement, Chair, speak to the Leader of the Council, Senator O'Connell, to see if there's a way we can help facilitate progress on this scheme, which is so crucial to Croydon's future. I'm more than happy to do that, Chair.
I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Devonish and relates to London's economic development.
Thank you, Chair. As Mayor, I've been promoting London to ensure we continue to be the most competitive, attractive, innovative city in the world for business. Despite opposition from the Conservative group, I continue to fund London and Partners to promote London to business leaders and investors around the world and spread the London is open message. In relation to Amazon, last year I met with Amazon's Senior Global Vice President Jay Carney and UK Country Manager Doug Gurr for a positive discussion about Amazon's future plans in London. In 2017, Amazon opened a new HQ in Shoreditch and has expanded to over 5,000 staff here in London. I was pleased that Jay Carney and Doug Gurr highlighted the business commitments they've got to London during our meeting. These are the kind of conversations I regularly hold. I've also held meetings with the likes of Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, not Tim Apple, Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, and senior leaders from other big businesses from Google to Goldman Sachs. In the face of opposition from the Conservatives on the Assembly, we've also supported LNP to open new overseas offices in 6 key cities to ensure London attracts further investment. I'm proud that since I've been Mayor, Google have announced they're opening a new building in King's Cross, housing 4,500 staff. I was pleased to perform the groundbreaking ceremony for this last year. Apple will open a new London HQ in Battersea. Facebook leasing 3 new offices in King's Cross. I'm determined, Chair, to ensure that the prosperity of our city is shared so that all Londoners can feel the benefits. This means making sure that big businesses in London are also good corporate citizens and they play by the rules and protect workers' rights.
And the hard left who opposed Amazon killing 25,000 jobs in New York. How will you stop this poison spreading across London under Jeremy Corbyn?
What a remarkable question. So
I can't help.
So here we have a West London Assembly member asking the Mayor of London in City Hall to give a running commentary of what is happening across the pond in relation to jobs in New York. Well,
we're a global city.
Well,
yes. I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to hear you. Deal with that mystery problem. The next question comes from Assembly Member Gavron. Oh, I'm sorry. Assembly Member Dismar is getting carried away.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I might clear some of that up. Mr Mayor, we all know that the Brexiteer Conservatives and UKIP are keen to see the UK as a low tax, low regulation, low standards, Singapore-style offshore economy with appalling labour standards. But do we really want New York's cast-offs like Amazon, who pulled out of New York City after criticism of their scheme to set up there? And can I remind the Conservatives that whilst Amazon's UK sales rose to more than £11 billion in 2017, the tax they paid, if any, on these sales is not publicly known because their sales are routed through Luxembourg, and that Amazon only paid 61.7 million corporation tax in 20 years. And they've also been criticised for their poor warehouse working conditions, which are well documented. Wouldn't it be better to encourage to come to London those businesses that pay their fair share of taxes and are known for good working practices? And isn't the real barrier to inward investment Brexit uncertainty, for which the Conservatives are responsible?
Well, one of the reasons why I spend so much time speaking to global CEOs and businesses is because of the threat of Brexit and the concerns businesses have in investing in London. But you're right. Our future as a city and as a country isn't in low-paid, low-skilled jobs. We don't want to race to the bottom. We should be looking at high-skilled, well-paid jobs. That means having good corporate citizens coming to London who play by the rules and protect workers' rights. And that's one of the reasons why we've set up the new Good Work Standard, and we'll be encouraging more and more employers to sign up to that. It's really important that business doesn't just do well in London, but also Londoners do well from business being in London as well.
I understand. Can we please now go on to the question from Assembly Member Gavron, which relates to child yield estimates and Playspace?
Thank you, Chair. Overcrowding in London affects around 250,000 households. This includes more than 1 in 5 children. The lack of room to play can significantly inhibit children's development and educational achievement. Safe and stimulating play is essential for children and young people's mental and physical health. My new draft London Plan, Policy S4, Play in Informal Recreation, requires residential developments likely to be used by children and young people to provide at least 10 square metres of play space per child. This is the first time a London plan sets a space requirement for play space per child rather than a benchmarking guidance. To support this, my team are finalising updates to the GLA population yield calculator, which gives an indication of the possible number and age of children that could be expected to live in a new housing development of a given bedroom or tenure mix. These updates will improve the calculator's usability and layout and will be published alongside a methodology document in the next few weeks. My team are scoping the potential to make better use of data that has become available since the 2011 census to more accurately reflect patterns of occupation in new build homes prior to the release of the new 2021 census data. I will also be updating the Shape and Neighbourhoods Play and Informal Recreation SPG following the adoption of the London Plan to give additional guidance on how play space can be incorporated into new development. And my new London Plan also requires boroughs to plan for appropriate school provision and facilities in London's opportunity areas where significant growth and demand is expected.
This is absolutely excellent news, and I want to congratulate you on putting the 10 square metres per child and young person, play space that is, an informal recreation space, actually in the plan, because it now has much more weight, or rather it will have when it's gone through the examination in public, which is on May the 3rd on this, and it won't go through uncontested. So I will do everything I can on behalf of the Assembly to make sure that we make the case as in the way you have now. I just want to check, you said that the calculation is being updated in the next few weeks?
Yes, correct. We'll publish that next few weeks, yeah.
Right, because that's really important, because the current calculator underestimates the number of children. I mean, as you said, it's really out of date. I mean, it goes back to the last 2 censuses, and therefore it's either 8 or 17 years out of date. But it also makes strange assumptions. Like, for instance, it assumes that most people who live in 2-bed flats will not have children. And so this is partly why I think we've got these overcrowding figures. And you'll see that the English Housing Survey, which came out in January, actually records, well, it says that across the whole of the private and social rented sector, all rented sectors are now at a record level of overcrowding. So what you're doing is so important. But you're doing it, just want to check, you're doing it in advance of the census figures coming out, and then you're going to do it again when the census figures have come out.
Correct. We're scoping the potential to do it before the census comes out, because obviously 2011 was a long time ago, been big changes, and make the service available to local authorities as well when it comes to them considering applications that are below the threshold that come to me as well.
That's absolutely brilliant. And then it will, of course, have to be done again once the census figures do come out. But it's so important to do it now. We can't waste time. My other ask, really, and you've answered my first ask, is well, of course, you're quite rightly putting a lot of emphasis on youth service provision and the cuts that there've been. And here's an idea that those 10 square metres could be used in a different way for young people. 10 square metres in aggregate. And what you have is a situation where the children, the young people, could actually be involved in all sorts of different activities. It could be safe, accessible, and of course free, informal space for children. And we've all seen on when we go around housing estates, no ball games. And yet, if you were, I've seen it myself because I was chair of Waterwater Farm Community Centre for quite a few years. And there we had midnight football, we had all sorts of activities. Just having five-a-side, just having basketball nets, all that can make a huge difference. And what I would like, my ask is that you produce a best practice guide to go with what you're now doing, so that local authorities can ensure when developments come forward that they actually must consult the young people themselves, but they actually use that space for proper recreation and sport activity for young people.
Well, Chair, as ever, really good points from Senator Gavron. Can I answer by saying I'm going to ask my Deputy Mayor, Joanne McCartney, to go away and look into the idea from Nicky Gavron, speak to not just the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Regeneration, but also the Deputy Mayor for Social Integration, Debbie Weeks-Barnard, and see what we can do, because I think it's a cracking idea. And some sort of best practice for councils would really go a long way, but also developers would then know what is expected from them, and they could build this into the scheme at an early stage. I think if you get involved at an early stage, at the design phase, these things are possible. So can I take that away, Chair, and respond offline to Senator Gavron through Deputy Mayor McCartney?
Thank
you. Next question is from Assembly Member Russell. It relates to solar power on the TfL estate.
Thank you, Chair. Our solar action plan sets an ambition for London to achieve 1 gigawatt of installed solar capacity by 2030, and TfL are directly contributing to this. Through the Refit programme, part of my Energy for Londoners programme, TfL has committed to deliver 1.1 megawatts of generating capacity by retrofitting solar panels across its larger existing rooftops, and work is underway to deliver on this. When constructing new buildings, TfL is integrating solar photovoltaic, solar PV, into the design where feasible. Solar PV has been incorporated into Whitechapel Elizabeth Line Station and the Old Oak Common Depot. However, the lack of support from government for solar severely undermines our efforts to deliver solar on a large scale on buildings across London. The removal also of the feed-in tariff for new solar applications this month, coupled with the government's increase in business rates for buildings, makes solar schemes less commercially attractive. I'm lobbying the government to improve the affordability of new solar, asking to address the business rates issue and minimising the gap between the removal of feed-in tariff and the introduction of the proposed smart export guarantee. But despite these setbacks, there's still huge opportunity for solar and other renewables across the whole of the TfL estate, not just the buildings. Using funding from my decentralised energy enabling project, TfL has commissioned a study of its land holdings and track sites that could offer potential for solar. This study is underway and will be completed later this year. TFL will progress the most promising sites for further development. In fact, a point made by the Assembly member at People's Question Time, a good point made last week. My environment strategy also sets an ambition for all the electricity powering TFL's rail services to be zero carbon by 2030. At the end of 2018, TFL undertook a market engagement exercise to understand the potential for third parties to directly supply low carbon electricity to TFL.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, there is huge variability in the number of solar panels installed on station buildings. So in 2012, Blackfriars Station became the world's largest solar-powered bridge, and it provides 50% of the station's energy needs. It's a really good example. Now, you mentioned you've managed to get solar at Whitechapel and at Old Oak, but there's a lot of recent station redevelopments like Tottenham Court Road, Farringdon Underground, Paddington Station, for example, where there are very few solar panels included. So my question is, have you considered putting solar panels on all new Crossrail 2 stations, which have outside buildings and platforms, to maximise their solar generating capacity?
Well, Chair, I'd be astonished if, in relation to the Crossrail 2 stations, that wasn't the case, because there is no alternative. We've got to be making sure we have more ways to reduce the carbon.
Okay, that's great. In which case, if you could you ask someone to get back to me with any details on that? I'd be...
Can I agree a letter, something to write to the member, is that right?
Yep, thank you. And then you mentioned the kind of the sort of mapping exercise to assess the whole sort of TfL building portfolio for potential solar generation capacity, alongside an assessment of TfL-owned, undeveloped and trackside land. Yeah. Now, it was reported in November last year, and you alluded to this, but TfL's Senior Energy Strategy Manager said that the problems of installing solar panels trackside had been overcome, and investors were waiting to fund it, which sounds great. So, did you look at the solar generating potential of the entire 450 miles of train tracks in London?
Chair, I'm not the information. I'm really sorry. Can I write to you that? Because I'm looking at that information.
Please do write to me, and that's it for my questions. Thanks very much.
I wonder if the Assembly, please, will agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Curtin and relates to freedom of speech.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that a man was arrested outside Southgate Station on the 23rd of February as a result of a complaint made by a member of the public. He was later released without charge. It's been widely reported that Mr. Elassani was arrested and subsequently de-arrested and released by the police at a different location some distance from the place of arrest. Following the police's handling of this matter, a complaint has been received, and this is now being reviewed by the Borough's Professional Standards Unit. I expect the police to take this matter seriously and can write to members once an update on these investigations has been received. As there is a complaint that has been investigated, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on the specific case. I will say this, Chair. It's always been clear that freedom of speech is critical and must be protected, but also the police must be able to investigate when allegations are made of a criminal offence. Police officers have to strike a difficult balance on this issue on a regular basis and in complex circumstances such as policing protests and public order incidents. The Commissioner and Met Police officers appreciate these sensitivities and take these duties seriously. The Commissioner and I both believe that the law should be applied equally to all Londoners, irrespective of their background and beliefs, and without fear or favour. As part of this, our police officers are rightly expected to always uphold the highest standards.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Mayor, and I'm glad you're saying that you will uphold freedom of speech, and that's a very, very important right that we have in this country. There were some things which I and many other people found very disturbing about the arrest of Mr. Elassani. And first of all, his Bible was taken away from him and he was accused of being racist. You say you can't comment on that specific case, but is there guidance to the police in dealing with street preachers or Christian street preachers like Mr. Elassani so that this kind of thing won't happen again?
I want to be very careful not to talk about this because there's an ongoing complaint, but I'm a firm advocate of freedom of expression, freedom of speech. It's enshrined in the Human Rights Act. Article 10 is quite clear about this. You look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is also quite clear about this. And there are balances to be struck, and I appreciate the police have got an incredible difficult job when it comes to policing protests and banners being held up, or a situation where a complaint's been made from a member of the public, and often they make split-second decisions. It's not for me to second-guess that decision taken in the heat of the moment at that difficult time. And the considerations they've got in relation to public order offences or breach of the peace. And so, you know, all I can say to the Assembly Chair is I understand the importance of holding this really important freedom. It's also a common law freedom, by the way, not simply a statute freedom. And in this particular case, once I've got an update, I'm happy to write to not just the Assembly member, but others, if others have an interest, to give them the outcome and stuff. But I understand why this question has been raised. I can understand the concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I would appreciate you writing to me, but there is another thing that maybe you can answer in a general term, is that, and this is in the public domain, that originally there was a statement put out that he was walked 200 metres and then de-arrested, but the statement was then later changed, and the police are now saying that he was driven some miles away and then left a long way away from the scene where he was arrested, and then de-arrested, so he hadn't done anything wrong. Is that something that you think is acceptable, or is that something that you think shouldn't be happening?
Well, Chair, again, I've got to be very careful because I've been asked to comment on the case about which has been made a complaint. In general terms, the police often will remove somebody who may be causing a breach of the peace away from the area to prevent a breach of the peace. I'm talking in general terms. And the police may do that to avoid having to make an arrest and a charge and a prosecution. It just takes heat out of the situation. I simply can't comment on this particular case. And one of the things that the investigation of the complaint will be looking into is the appropriateness or otherwise of the police's action, including proportionality as well.
Okay. Going back to the issue of freedom of speech, I mean, there have been street preachers from many different religions in the city for many, many years, centuries even, particularly Christian street preachers. Now there's a worry, a fear among people that the freedom of speech that you speak about is being undermined. Would you be able to say that Christian street preachers are able, they have the freedom of speech to read from any part of the Bible in the city without fear of being arrested?
One of the great things living in a democracy is this ability to debate and discuss and have discussion, sometimes an argument. That's one of the joys of living in London, and we should protect that. And it's a special thing we've got. The challenge the police have is sometimes that can go into behaviour that can lead to public order concerns or a breach of the peace. And it's a very difficult balance they've got to strike. And there's not an unlimited right to freedom of expression or free speech. There are limitations, and there's a balancing to be done. But I'm quite clear in my own views. We should go as far as we can to uphold that really important and sacred principle, and that includes discourse about religion. It's a great thing about our city. You can have these healthy debates, and it doesn't come to blows or leads to animus, but it's a healthy debate. And one of the great things about our city, by the way, is the response from the Christian community to what happened in Christchurch. That solidarity shown by the Archbishop of Canterbury, by the Bishop of London, by the Christian communities and the Jewish communities and the Hindu communities and the Sikh communities to the Muslim communities is one of the reasons we should be proud to be Londoners. And that's why I don't want to end that sort of debate that takes place and curtail that healthy debate.
Discourse between religions about religious ideas is specifically protected in the Public Order Act. But I think specifically what Christians would like to know after this incident, and also in any guidance that might come out, is specifically, are they allowed to speak or read out any part of the Bible in London without fear of being arrested?
Well, Chair, I've got to confess I've not read the Bible, all the versions, and I'm not sure. But I mean that's a question really for the lawyer or the police, not for me as the mayor.
Okay, maybe you've answered as much as you can. Yeah. Okay, thank you for your answers, Mr.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Eshalomi to ask about staffing at Transport for London.
Thank you, Chair. I'm committed to providing a safe, reliable and affordable transport service for all Londoners while placing TfL's finance on a sustainable footing for the long term. TfL is working to deliver an operating surplus by 2022. To do so, it's managing significant challenges. This includes an average £700 million annual reduction in government funding. And we've seen TSSA Union campaigning on this at City Hall today. I was pleased, like you, to meet them this morning. A subdued economy affecting its revenues and the delay to the opening of the Elizabeth line. TfL is therefore taking a range of actions to reduce operating costs and to secure other sources of revenue. This includes utilising TfL's property estate and developing its consultancy services in order to protect frontline transport services. At this stage, it's not possible to say what will be required to achieve the 30% target in middle and back office functions over 3 years. Any proposals directly affecting staff will be subject to consultation with staff and trade unions and could involve both staff and non-staff costs. I understand TfL will seek to reduce the impact on staff through reductions in non-permanent labour and through not filling existing vacancies. Since I became Mayor, TfL has been delivering efficiency savings. Having already redesigned 30 business areas, this has had a significant impact on reducing costs. And we've reduced recurring annual savings of £111 million. And TfL is on track to exceed its planned savings targets for this financial year. A tangible example of these recent efficiencies has been the creation of a new business services function, which has brought together operational activity that was previously within HR and finance. By bringing these teams together, there will be further opportunities to streamline common processes and look for other ways in which to deliver a better service at a reduced cost.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, just to be clear, that we're doing it at the main culprit and the reason TfL is in this position is because we don't have that central grant from government. But as in your role as chair of TfL, Mr. Mayor, I'm worried about some of the issues in terms of these job cuts. The majority of the job losses that have already happened are from lower grades, and we haven't seen a reduction in the number of directors. In terms of the headcount from 2015 and 2017, there's a figure of 30% reduction in senior management. How many of that reduction over the next 3 years, do you know, Mr. Mayor, will be in senior staff?
So you mean projecting forward?
Yeah, going forward.
So before we get to that stage, there'll be lots of work done to plan, to design, and then to consult, not just with the executive team, but also with the trade unions. So I can't give you those figures at this stage, and nor could TfL, because that work's not been done to break down how many will be senior staff, how many will be middle or lower staff, how many will be non-staff as well in relation to the savings to be made. That's part of the work that will take place during the course of the business plan.
And that's great. And again, I know that you've been very keen in terms of making sure TfL reduce the day-to-day bill on consultants. But as we all know, consultants do not appear in TfL's figures. Can we make sure that maybe we should look at how we can address that going forward? And then lastly, a number of these roles that may be cut, their back office functions including engineering, maintenance, health and safety, delivery of major projects. So they may not seem like frontline cuts, but actually they play such a key service. How are we going to ensure that if those cuts do go forward, that it won't adversely impact the day-to-day running of provision of services across London? Because safety has to be paramount.
Yeah, and that's the key point you raise. I mean, so we are going to make sure we keep frontline staff, but you're right, actually back office staff have a huge role to make the front office staff do their work. And so that's why I said it'd be unwise for me to give a figure in relation to staff cuts and senior staff cuts as well, because that sort of design work is going to take place, because the key thing is to make sure TfL continues to be reliable, safe, but also affordable. Safety is the most important of those three issues. As part of the design work, but before it gets to proposals, they're looking at those sorts of issues, because safety is of paramount concern. And the consultation that we now do is far superior than done before. I've been criticised by the Conservatives for spending time talking to trade unions and the facility time given, but TfL is undertaking the biggest reorganisation in her history. If we don't talk to our staff and consult with them and those that represent the staff, don't be surprised if that leads to concern, frustration and anxiety from those hard-working staff. So I don't apologise for the facility time, I don't apologise for meeting trade union leaders, I don't apologise for consulting those who work in TfL.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Cooper will ask a question on sustainable heating.
Thank you, Chair. For too long we've relied on fossil fuels like gas to heat our buildings, so I welcome the Committee on Climate Change's clear position on the need for high-quality new homes that are not reliant on gas. We do need to move, though, towards renewable and low-carbon ways of heating London's buildings. To make this happen, we need to transition away from gas boilers, which are worse than climate change and polluting our already toxic air, to zero-carbon technologies like renewable heat pumps and heat networks supplied by renewable sources. As Assembly Member Cooper rightly points out, in London we have been more ambitious than the government in doing this. In 2015, the government scrapped its zero-carbon home standard, which would have driven more low-carbon heat in new homes. The recent spring statement suggests government is revisiting this, but their inaction is resulting in a decade of lost action on low-carbon and renewable heat. In London, we've been the exception to this. We kept the zero-carbon home standard for new buildings when it was scrapped across the rest of the country, and we plan to apply it to non-domestic buildings when the new draft of the plan is adopted this year. These policies are already helping new buildings in London to transition away from gas boilers to more efficient low-carbon and renewable heat sources like heat pumps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, as you know, before Christmas, we asked you to declare a climate emergency, which you did. and we're in quite a difficult position now. We're moving ahead in terms of reducing emissions from vehicles, but household fuels already form 58% of emissions nationally, and of course in terms of London, carbon emissions in London have gone from, for buildings now, from 42% in 2008 to 47% now, because of other emissions coming down. And the same with NO2, it's an increasing percentage. It's gone from 19% up to 25%. And I just wondered if you were having any success in lobbying the government either to think about investing in national infrastructure and seeing moving away from fossil fuels as an important national infrastructure project, or anything that they are thinking about doing to incentivise so that we can really start to scale up quickly, because we really need to get a wriggle on, as you know.
So my officials have had good conversations with government officials. We've had decent conversations with government ministers, but there's a lack of action from government. And frankly, look, the government's in paralysis because of Brexit. No decisions are being taken. Everything's been kicked down the road, which is catastrophic for climate change. Catastrophic. You've seen young Londoners march to make sure our generation gets the message from them. And their frustration is the delay from us responding. I've got to say this, though. Our powers are limited. Our resources are limited. We're doing what we can, and according to independent analysis, going much further than any previous administration, but other global cities across the world. I speak regularly to C40 to get ideas that I can pinch Nick do in London, that we can emulate in London, but it's difficult. Unless the government steps in with more powers, more resources, or not be able to make the progress we need to make. We are in a climate change emergency. I've seen no evidence that the government currently gets that.
Well, it's quite disgraceful, as you say, to see that the House of Commons is empty when there's a debate about climate change, and that it's actually school children who are bringing the issue of climate change to the top of the agenda by undertaking school strikes. I just wondered if you've done a lot of interesting work, I think, with your teams on heat networks, particularly in the larger new developments. I just wondered if there'd been an analysis done of what we can do to fit individual heat pumps, because that's an area I think that we've not really pushed ahead on as much. Is that an area that officials are looking into?
We are looking at the issue of retrofitting heat pumps into homes. The key thing is the energy efficiency market is not fit for purpose. We need to restart the stalled market. There's got to be regulatory powers introduced from government to make it work. But also for us to encourage existing heating systems to be replaced with heat pumps, we need to have funding provided for a rollout of low carbon and renewable heating systems that go beyond 2021. And so as long as the government's in paralysis, we're going to, I'm afraid, not see the progress we need in this area.
I mean, obviously, we need to scale up in terms of insulation, because you can't really fit heat pumps unless you've got very energy efficient buildings. The other issue with heat network properties is it's quite hard if you've got a heat network for individual residents to then switch supplier. Effectively, you can't. You're on the network. Is there anything that is being looked at by your team in terms of residents' rights and how they can be protected in those circumstances?
One of the things we're asking government to do is to work closely with Ofgem in relation to this area, because regulation is lacking, but Ofgem can step in, because the difficulty in switching suppliers is a problem in London with dense areas and the challenges we have. So we're supporting the better regulation of heat networks, so properly designed, but also to make it easier for consumers to switch, seeing if Ofgem can do something to step in there.
And finally, Mr. Mayor, you recently published a research report on the impact of NOx pollution from boilers. How will you be taking forward the outcomes of that research into action to tackle this as we tackle London's toxic air in general?
I mean, just disclosure, it was a small scale study. It wasn't a comprehensive study as we'd have liked, and it was done because we were concerned about real world emissions versus claimed emissions. We saw the Dieselgate fiasco with cars. The preliminary response we have is it seems like there isn't the same issues with cars as there is with boilers. Roughly speaking, real world emissions are the same as those that are claimed. One of the things we're talking to the government about is if they can do further work in this area to make sure we can be reassured by the claims made by companies in relation to the emissions. That would give us the confidence we lack in relation to cars.
Okay, so something that's being picked up with government. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Assembly Member Arnold to ask about the adult education budget.
Thank you, Chair. Our Skills for London strategy sets out our ambition to create a single integrated skills and adult education offer for London to deliver a more strategic, whole system approach to post-16 skills. While devolution of the adult education budget is an important and welcome first step, the government must go further. We need a bespoke devolution deal that is responsive to London's economy, considering our scale of the impact of Brexit on the supply of talent and other skills challenges, particularly the technological challenge. I'm going to carry on lobbying the government to devolve further powers to London, including 16 to 18 provision, career services, apprenticeship levy funds and the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the domestic successor to the European Structural and Investment Funds. We're also doing some stuff already to help young people with the new Young Londoners Fund, through the ESF programmes aimed at young Londoners who are not in education, employment or training, and the £7 million digital tech pipeline, helping young Londoners with talent without the opportunity.
Right. Thank you, Mayor. I welcome your answer. And can I just add my appreciation for your commitment to supporting young people, especially those aged 16 to 18, and those young people, those young Londoners who are not in employment, education or training for whatever reason. And do please continue the dialogue, yourself and your deputy and officers with the DFE, because as you say, the devolution must go further. Absolutely. If we are to get the funding and to be able to have that seamless offer for our young people. And as you mentioned, we do have a problem, if you like, on the horizon around the 16 to 18-year-old package, because much of that comes from the ESF, which regrettably will end in 2020 because of Brexit. Now, Mayor, a key pillar of your Skills for London strategy is your adoption of the impact-based approach to commissioning adult education in London. And it's an approach which I welcome, and the feedback that I've received, it's that it's been welcomed by the FE sector. Can I ask you to urge Deputy Mayor Pipe to publish a 6-month progress report so that the Assembly's education panel can start the scrutiny of this innovative approach? If members don't know what this approach is, they can ask me later.
Yeah, I mean, in short, it's making sure that we have colleges and trainers incentivised to make sure that people who go through their system can get a job, a sustainable job, and it's to look at the impact of the work the colleges are doing. Can I respond this way? We want to make sure we're transparent, but also use the expertise around this room. I'll ask Jules Pipe to work with Senator Arnold to work out the best way of giving you the information you need to properly improve and help us raise our game. For the first year, we're limited what we can do because of the conditions of the devolution. We've already, though, made sure British Sign Language is being taught, but also we're providing assistance to those who are in work, not getting the living wage, who could do with some additional training. We've done that already. We'll do that in year 1. But you're right, from year 2 we can do a lot more scope. So we'll work with you in relation to what we can do to work with providers to make sure the courses they're providing are really adding value to Londoners to get the jobs they need.
Thank you.
And the next question is from Assembly Member Twycross and relates to the apprenticeship levy.
The apprenticeship levy is not currently working for London's businesses and residents. Apprenticeship starts in London have fallen by 14% since introduction of the levy in April 2017, compounding London's historic low rates of apprenticeship starts. Many London businesses are telling us that they have not fully utilised their apprenticeship levy contribution. For instance, a survey of London employees by London councils and London Chamber of Commerce, an industry found that 42% of the capital's levy-paying businesses do not expect to use any of their levy funds in the next year. Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe, together with London Councils, London First and London Chambers of Commerce and Industry, have sent joint letters to the Chancellor and Minister for State for Apprentices, lobbying them in relation to what changes need to be made. And I've also worked with the Metro Mayors to lobby the government for us to be given some of the resources that is currently unspent, but also for us to be given the powers that Wales and Scotland currently have that we don't.
Thank you. What changes would you like to see the government make to ensure that their apprenticeship policy works better for London?
A number of things. We want to be allowed to pool apprenticeship funding to invest in the city's talent pipeline. We want the levy funds to be able to use for pre-employment training, support people to get into the workplace, to get them match fit for that position, sort of soft skills people call them. We also want some of the money, a small amount, to be used for some of the administration that small employers can't do, that's required for having apprenticeships as well. We also, and this is something you've been pushing on for some time, want to have more part-time and flexible apprenticeships. It's really difficult for some private sector employers to provide those. If we were in charge of this, we could do far more there in relation to this area as well.
Excellent, thank you. And you've been pushing for the government to allow you to receive unspent apprenticeship levy funds in London. If you were to receive this funding, how would you spend this money, and is progress being made in this area?
Well, not the progress being made that we think needs to be made. By the way, it's not simply London. Other parts of the country have also got unspent apprenticeship levy as well. It's like £1.3 billion. It's a lot of money. What we're hoping it can be used for is making sure we can help small businesses in particular. There are small businesses who would love to have an apprenticeship but can't and not ready. The bigger businesses will help them. And if we had some of this unspent money, we could get that coordination working well. There are many other ideas we've got. These ideas don't come from us in City Hall. They come from speaking to employers, businesses, young Londoners about what sort of scheme would help them the most. I genuinely believe we can do a better job than civil servants in Whitehall. Nothing against civil servants in Whitehall. We know our city far better than they do.
Yes, I would agree on that. And we've seen the numbers both as a proportion and percentage for construction apprenticeships increase in 2017-18, and we finally have some women undertaking construction engineering apprenticeships compared to 0 in 2015-16, and I think that's welcome. What will you do to continue to work towards the end of gender stereotyping apprenticeships, and what will we do from here in City Hall?
It's really important. So TfL does a huge amount of work in relation to getting young women Londoners to get their apprenticeships in engineering in the sort of industries not traditionally seen as women-friendly industries. A huge amount of work TfL are doing. In City Hall, if you look at the numbers of our apprenticeship intake, we've got lots and lots of women, diverse Londoners, including ethnically diverse, but also working class Londoners from poorer communities as well. And it's really important we use apprentices as a way in. Higher education is okay for some people, but not for everyone. And we've got to get rid of the snobbery around apprenticeships as well, and emulate some of the German experience where apprenticeships have the same esteem as academic education as well. And we're doing our bit from City Hall and the GLA functional bodies as well.
Thank you. I think that would be very welcome. And there's a bit of a theme of the day around no-deal Brexit. What impact do you think a no-deal Brexit could have on the number of apprenticeships being started in London? And how is the funding you announced in November to create new apprenticeships in hospitality and construction helping to mitigate that?
So we've, in the most recent funding we've given, announced £1.3 million towards 3 apprenticeship pilots, and we've deliberately chosen those 3 areas: construction, hospitality and retail. Yeah. For a variety of reasons, not least for the reasons that Senator Duval alluded to, which is with fewer EU citizens coming here, we know that's happened, possibly even fewer coming in the future, there is now an urgency to make sure we accelerate Londoners to get the skills through apprenticeships for these areas, and that's why we're doing this piece of work in those industries. And the sort of work we're doing is to help employers get some funding that they are needed, help them create apprenticeships, but to see if we can transfer some of the levy funds to employers in these sectors and supply chains locally to help apprenticeships in these areas. It's really, really important.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To time. And finally, from Assemblymember Russell, a question on Car Free Day.
Thank you, Chair. TfL, my Deputy Mayor for Transport, and my Walking and Cycling Commissioner are developing plans for how London will celebrate Car Free Day on Sunday the 22nd of September. I support an event that sees our streets open up so that Londoners of all ages, backgrounds and abilities can enjoy walking, cycling and being active in a safe, traffic-free and unpolluted environment. Car Free Day will showcase culture, sport and healthy fun activities in a significant area of central London, enabling people to see parts of the city that are often dominated by traffic from a different perspective. We'll also be working with boroughs and community organisations to activate other neighbourhoods across the city. We're hoping to have an estimated 10 to 12 kilometres of London's roads closed to private vehicles. TfL is talking with several boroughs to identify the best place in London to hold it. Over the next 5 years, £2.3 billion will be invested in making London streets healthier, safer and more welcoming. I'm determined to encourage more Londoners to walk and cycle. We know that other major London events such as the Marathon, Ride London and New Year's Eve result in a drop in particulate matter, NOx and nitrogen dioxide pollution. We'll work with a wide range of partners, including local authorities and community groups, to deliver on this event. We're also going to make the most of other events that are taking place on the same day, including Totally Thames and our annual celebration of the River Thames and Open House. Last year, TfL supported boroughs with around 50 streets across London, from Greenwich to Hackney to Ealing, that were organising car-free days events, and the charity London Play, who organised Play Street, will do this again this year. And I'd invite all London boroughs who want to get involved to contact TfL.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and it's really good that you're working on Car Free Day now. I'd love to see people walking, cycling and scooting all over London on traffic-free streets, as you described. Now, Paris has been really ambitious with its Car Free Day. They've opened up large, sort of whole areas of the centre to people, not just linear streets. So will you ensure that your Car Free Day is properly ambitious, showcasing the possibilities for our city with whole neighbourhoods having far less traffic?
Firstly, can I thank you for your support in this area? It's been really, really helpful. So Paris started earlier than us. They started in 2015. This is our first real year of doing this, and so I've got to be honest, we aren't going to get to those sort of levels yet, but I'm impatient for change, transformative change, and with your support, council support, London support, I think we'll get there.
That's great. I think the important thing is the sort of networks of streets, so that people sort of see that. The other thing is to make sure that we learn from it, so we measure the pollution on the day and also the traffic levels on the day. And then a final thing about Paris is that they've actually moved forward to make their car-free events monthly from last October. So will you consider making Car Free Day a monthly thing going forwards?
Can I just say this, and I say this as somebody who is friends with, genuinely, the Mayor of Paris. Don't believe all the hype in relation to what you read about other cities and what they do. And I've got a list here of what Bogota, Paris, New York, San Francisco and Singapore claim to do and what they really do. And I've got to be very careful, Chair, because many of these leaders of these cities are friends of mine. All I'd say is we're trying to learn from the best around the world. I'm hoping this year will be a huge success, and it makes it far easier. We've got support from other party colleagues and councils as well. But you're right about the joined-upness to make sure it works across the entire city.
It's the area-wide thing, but do please think about the monthly thing. I think I'm pretty much out of time now. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for your answer.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Would the Assembly please agree the motion set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions given?
Agreed.
Thank you. Will you now please agree to delegate to me authority in respect of the Assembly's powers and functions in urgent matters, given to me as Chairman of the Assembly in consultation with the Deputy Chair, party group leaders and relevant committee chairs, from the close of this meeting until the next scheduled meeting of the Assembly, which will be the annual general meeting on the 2nd of May 2019. Thank you. And can I formally say that the Assembly's AGM will take place at 2:30 on Thursday the 2nd of May here. There is no urgent business. The meeting is ended.